Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. The workshop duration will be approximately 3 hours. To ask a question, please use the Q&A functionality only. You can either ask a question with your name or anonymously. If you wish to contribute or leave a remark, please do so in the chat. During the presentations or while the panels are discussing, you can write up your question in the QA session. More relevant questions will be selected to be directed to the panelists to be answered. This workshop will be recorded. Only what is said and presented on the screen by panelists and the moderators will be recorded, so your questions don't appear in the recording. The recorded version will be uploaded on the European Blockchain Observatory media channels a few days after the event. Thank you. Please let me welcome Mr. Peter Zilkovic from the European Commission to kickstart the event.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the very informative introduction. I'm Peter Zilkovic, Head of Unit for Digital Innovation and Blockchain, and co-chair of the FinTech Task Force, and some very topical issues in front of us today with a great lineup of speakers and experts. Non-fungible tokens, I think it's great that they're now demystified. We're in the midst of a set of policy and legislative initiatives at the European Commission with the other European institutions. Markets in crypto assets is right now in negotiation in the Parliament and the Council, and the place or the lack of a place for NFTs in there is one of the issues that's definitely coming up. And then if NFTs stay in their current framework, then there's a lot of interesting issues in the areas of national law as well as in aspects of European law, civil law aspects, which will be discussed today. So we'll see the keynote on a social and financial breakthrough, demystifying the NFTs, some very interesting use cases. So we have some exciting people to make some presentations of some of these very interesting things that are happening out there in the market and in the society. Then the aforementioned civil law aspects with Nina Luisa Siedler, ownership, possession, transfer, acquisition in good faith. So very interesting things. And then a finance, a regulatory panel moderated by Agata Ferreira. So I will not keep you too much longer. I will hopefully be listening almost all the time until I have to leave for the European Central Bank with another topical issue, the digital euro, later this afternoon. But I look forward to hearing all the great speakers, and I welcome you all again to the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum, to the latest workshop. Thank you.
Up next, we're going to present Mr. Adonis Polemitis, CEO of the University of Nicosia, who is going to deliver a keynote speech for today.
Great, thank you. And let me just share my screen. Super. Well, thank you everyone for having me today. I am delighted to be here with such a wonderful group. And I can't tell you how excited I am about this topic. And so I think I have about 20 minutes. I've made only 8 slides, so I'm mostly going to talk about this a little bit, but I do believe this is a transformational technology with a lot of implications. And so I'll go through a few slides, and then if there's time left, I'll speak more broadly off the slides. Let me start here, because this is a discussion we've been having internally at the University of Nicosia for about 6 months of, are NFTs actually important? And it has been a very interesting process for me and for us, in that even here where there's a pool of people that are genuinely crypto native, there was an initial reaction that says, well, okay, of course, Bitcoin's important and Ethereum's important and smart contracts are important and DeFi is very important, but why are these cartoon characters important? I understand that some people might like cartoon characters. I understand that it might be interesting to people in the way that some people collect stamps or collect baseball cards, but baseball cards are not an important part of the world economy. They're not an important social factor. Why should we be taking this seriously? And my perspective which has evolved over the last 6 months, is that this is actually a hugely important area. Arguably, and I'm not quite ready to say this, but I think a case can be made that arguably it's the most interesting area right now in the field of blockchain and crypto assets, and the one with the most potential to enable regular people, regular consumers to participate in a different type of economy. And so before I get into specifics, I'm going to take a step back for a couple of slides on kind of conceptual issues, and then we'll get into the specifics and see what this might mean. The first message that I'd like to leave the group with is that NFTs are not a thing. And to follow up on the introduction, I don't think there can be regulations for NFTs. NFTs are a horizontal technology. They are not a vertical technology. NFTs will support art, they will support real estate, they will support football tickets, they will support rentals in holiday villas, they will support coupons. So to the degree that someone is thinking about the regulatory aspect of NFTs, I think there's a risk that if NFTs are defined too early from a regulatory perspective, you're going to lock in on the current use case, and the current use case isn't the end, isn't the middle, isn't even the end of the beginning. We're still at the beginning of what can be enabled with NFTs. And I believe any regulatory approach in the long run is going to have to look through the NFT to what it's actually representing. So if an NFT is representing a baseball card, the NFT should be treated as a baseball card. If the NFT is representing a house, the NFT should be treated like real estate. I can't imagine any other model that's going to work any more than we could say we have a technology that applies generally to websites, a technology that regulation that applies generally to websites, regulation that applies generally to tokens, to take a more, with fungible tokens, where the model is a little bit more developed, we have gotten to some understanding that there could be utility tokens and payment tokens and security tokens, and we treat those differently. The token itself isn't what's important, is how it's being used. The same thing applies with NFTs. NFTs, strictly speaking, as NFTs, are simply a way to represent something that's unique. If that something is a baseball card, there are one set of implications. If that something is preferred stock in a public company, there's a different set of implications. So this is, I think it's very important that at this very early stage, that the regulatory regime is not locked in too early and too restrictively, because I think there's a huge opportunity for innovation. Now, all the other benefits of blockchains do apply here with NFTs, right? It's digital for a effectively digital world that we live in now. It's by nature global. It's by nature permissionless, and permissionless by here, I think the important thing we will see is that there are gatekeepers and guardians of culture today. This allows direct participation between consumers and creators, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And they are programmable. The term that is used often in this field is composable. You can compose one piece, one NFT with a different piece of software, with a different NFT, with a set of activities that you can do with it. But composable really is a fancy word in this context for programmable. Now, why am I excited about NFTs? Well, the world is, at a first approximation, non-fungible. We have been used to dealing with digital instruments and then previously non-digital instruments that are fungible. Why are they fungible? They are fungible as an administrative convenience. It's hard to represent thousands, millions, billions of non-fungible objects. So we've turned them into fungible. objects. However, the world at large is overwhelmingly non-fungible. A ticket for a football match this afternoon in seat 17B is different than a ticket for that same match in seat 17C, which is different than a ticket for that same stadium, same seat, but for a different match. My health records are different than your health records. My house is different than your house. My piece of art is different than your piece of art. My room facing the sea in a hotel is different than your room facing the mountain at a hotel. And so on and so forth. If you look around, and the world actually is almost never fungible, right? I don't know how many nines we should put, but what percent of the world is non-fungible, but it's many nines. Fungibility is something that we humans do to make things work better within our systems. But a precise representation of the world would be non-fungible. And so here we have a technology that, because it can represent non-fungible objects and it is programmable, so certain things that manually perhaps you couldn't handle the volume of non-fungible objects are actually manageable now in their native state, which is non-fungible. Let's go back to the CryptoPunks. I assume most of this audience knows on the left that this is the iconic initial NFT project. I mean, there were some NFT projects before it, but this was the one that captured the public attention. And I'm going to use this example less because I think art is the most important and complete endpoint of NFTs, but you can see the types of themes that will emerge from using this as an example. On the right are Andy Warhol's soup cans, which are generally acknowledged to have been the project that started the pop art movement. There are 10,000 CryptoPunks, each one's represented by a token. There are 32 soup cans in the first series of Andy Warhol, and there was a second series. Each one has 250 prints. If you wanted to buy a soup can today, you would have to go to a set of dealers, most likely in downtown Manhattan, maybe secondarily in London, and one or two other metropolis. I certainly can't go to any art dealer in Nicosia and hope to find a soup can for sale. If you go to these dealers, on the whole, on a typical day, there will be no soup cans for sale. If there is one, it's probably not the one you want. And then the dealer will tell you the price for the soup can is $147,000. And your ability to know if that's right, wrong, how it matches with prior sales is highly limited. On the other hand, if you want to buy a CryptoPunk, the only thing you need is an internet connection. If you go to the Larva Labs site, you can see which Ethereum address owns every single CryptoPunk, the complete transaction history of every CryptoPunk, whether it was bought, sold, transferred, what CryptoPunks are currently available for sale, what the last sales were of CryptoPunks with those characteristics. So it's split by, ones with white hair, ones with orange hair, ones with hoodies, ones with nerd glasses. And which ones are currently available wherever you are in the world. So if you wanted to be an Andy Warhol collector, realistically, you're limited to a handful of metropolis, or you're very wealthy and you can travel. If you want to be a CryptoPunk collector, you need now, they're expensive, but in the beginning they weren't. You just need a computer. If one is not for sale, you can make a bid for it. And so when I look at what CryptoPunks are relative to soup cans, what it feels like you're looking at is eBay relative to your local antique shop. And this, you might say, okay, well, that's fine. That's fine, Antonis. I'm not hugely interested in either CryptoPunks nor soup cans. But I'm here to tell you it's not going to stop there, right? Like art in and of itself is a significant market. There's something like $60 billion of global sales every year in art, which means the stock of art is measured in the trillions. But we're not going to stop here with art. NFTs will eventually platform more and more categories of goods. And as they platform more and more categories of goods, it allows more and more categories of goods to benefit from these types of benefits, that there's greater accessibility. You have everyone on equal terms. You have more efficient markets. You have more effective markets. And you have the ability to have, I believe, much more rapid innovation for all the same reasons that the post-internet world evolves more rapidly than the pre-internet world. Let's go to composability, because this is super interesting. Even still in the art world, and I keep that because I'm making this challenging for myself. I say, well, a piece of art is just a piece of art, but how are you going to compose it? Well, this isn't actually accurate. There is a website called Super Rare that does fine art NFTs. They have built in an artist royalty. So the artist sells the NFT on day one to a collector, and maybe it's for one ether, it's $2,000. And then it's sold to another one, and a third one, and a fourth one, and a fifth one. And someday down the line, it's trading for 50 ether or 100 ether. Unlike in the traditional art world, where the stereotype of the starving artist is broadly true, the stereotype that often the collectors get rich after the artist has passed away. Here, if the work does well, the artist is rewarded along the way automatically with their royalties, not through some complicated paper-based, organizational-based, human-based approach, which in practice is so hard to implement that it doesn't happen, but in an automated way. So as that NFT goes from collector to collector, the artist automatically receives their royalty. 2 weeks ago, they introduced another test that they're trialing this year, which are collector royalties. So this is meant to reward collectors who invest in early stage emerging artists. So if you come and you're the first one to purchase a piece from a new artist, there will be a piece of the royalties that are now shared with the first collector and the second collector and the third collector in decreasing percentages. And you suddenly have a way to more accurately, more transparently, arguably much more fairly allocate value in an ecosystem that is not known for being hugely fair to some of the participants. And again, you might say this is not an area of interest to me. I'm not hugely interested in art, but the same things will apply to everything else that becomes an NFT. These are the benefits of composing.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The slides are not working, so we would like you to please try and share the slides. I think you are showing the other screen. So we haven't seen any of your slides. If you could possibly.
Oh, what screen are you seeing?
We are just seeing the PowerPoint and not the actual slides.
Oh, okay. So you're seeing this here? You're not seeing the presentation?
We were seeing just the introduction of your slides. I'm really sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Okay, well, we said about horizontal technology. We said the world is non-fungible. We mentioned the CryptoPunks. Are you seeing the slides now?
No.
No.
Let me stop sharing and reshare and see if that works.
Thank you.
Do you see them now?
Yes, but it's
Yes.
not in presentation mode.
Right. How about now?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, so we had spoken about horizontal technology. We had spoken about the fact that the world is non-fungible. We had discussed CryptoPunks and soup cans, and we were here on composability. And the point of composability and the point of permissionlessness and the point of keeping the system open, the ecosystem open for now, is we will invent usage cases that didn't have analogs in the analog world. The idea of automated collector and artist royalties is something that is hard to imagine being implementable in the analog world. And we have to, I think, give some space to the ecosystem to develop these capabilities. Now, how do I think NFTs will play out across fields? I think of them in two tracks that are actually going to run independently. The first track is for natively digital assets. It's the top track. We are today at art and collectibles and a little bit of gaming. When we say a little bit of gaming, it is the type of blockchain-based games where if you own a character in a game or a shield or a sword, you actually own that as an asset in your Ethereum wallet that you can then trade with others, compose with other software. And it is not, you are not simply a database entry in the gaming companies, servers. This will proceed to more generally giving us a way to own culture. You're seeing the beginnings of this when people have taken famous memes and the meme owner, who to date has not received anything from them, has turned them into NFTs, and someone says, yes, I would like to own that meme or one of that meme, and has been a way to reward the person who had created it. This will more generally allow people to own and pay for culture, and when things can be owned and paid for, you will get more of them. I suspect we will have a flourishing of culture from this technology. And ultimately, I would say towards the end of the decade, this will be the underlying property basis, property rights for the metaverse. If you think of the metaverse as a persistent virtual or augmented reality and the objects there are two visions of what that could be. It could all be owned by some big, most likely American gaming company, and everyone is just living in their proprietary world. Or it can be an open system where people actually own their actual objects in that world. And for me, the second world is much more compelling. The second, which kind of goes in parallel, is can you use NFTs to represent off-chain objects? Tickets, coupons, hotel reservations, villa reservations, ads on a billboard from 2 p.m. to 2:05 p.m. in central Berlin, your health records, your trading records, your real world assets, your car, your home, what have you. Yes, these will take longer because here you need the bridges to the offline world. And here there will need to be, I believe, area by area appropriate regulation to say something like real estate that is heavily regulated would need a regulated bridge to be actually representable with an NFT. So I believe the natively digital assets will go faster and the regulatory issues are much easier there. And then the off-chain assets will start with the easier topics. If you want to issue a coupon as an NFT, I don't think it presents too many regulatory difficulties, and will end with the more complicated assets towards the end of the decade. The field, which today is effectively digital assets, has, as probably most of you know, exploded in the last year. There were $14 million of global NFT sales first half of 2020, and $2.5 billion of sales first half of 2021. Our team, we had a team here at UNIC that conducted what I think is the first market cap of a NFT collection, and they ran a set of machine learning algorithms and calculated the total market value of all the CryptoPunks at around 2 billion. So this is a stock number. The prior number was a flow number. Today, it's somewhere below $1 billion. My off-the-cuff estimate is that the total NFT market today is in the range of $10 billion of value of market cap. It will certainly cross over $1 trillion in the 2020s. And I think over time, it's fairly unbounded. The world will be progressively more digital. And this will be, I think, the primary way digital value is represented. So with that, what are our conclusions? This is a horizontal technology. It will apply to dozens of fields. So it needs to be thought of by stakeholders in that capacity. I think for sure this will be the underlying architecture and property rights, let's say, of digital culture. including ultimately the metaverse, which is certainly something that is coming within this decade. And over time, we'll be able to improve liquidity and composability of some off-chain assets using NFTs. But I think that's a separate case than the purely digital case. Things that can be NFTs pick up orders of magnitude improvements in liquidity, accessibility, globalization, and ability to innovate. I think we will see a redefinition of the creator-consumer relationship. So far, the relationship is that there is a creator, which primarily in our culture is large corporations, and then there's a passive consumer of that culture. I believe here you'll have a more joint co-creation of culture. I think there's just dramatic scope for innovation here, particularly in the creative arts, and for the European Union, which has probably the world's most rich heritage in the creative arts. There is a massive opportunity to take that into the 21st century. And since we do have certain stakeholders in this audience, I believe this is an area ecosystem that should be encouraged. I see some concerning articles in the press that the major lens on NFTs might be a banking regulatory lens. I think that would be short-sighted and unfortunate. I think this is not primarily something to be thought of as a money transmission system or a banking system or securities token system. This is primarily a cultural ecosystem as it stands today, and then will become an, let's say, life operational ecosystem. And so there has to be, I think, some thoughtful balancing of letting the ecosystem evolve, taking a risk-adjusted view to the ecosystem. The system is not systemic now in any way, and giving it an opportunity to see what it can become. So I think I'm a couple of minutes over time, so I will stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Polemitis. As you might know, the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum is frequently publishing reports trying to identify different applications of the blockchain technology. You can visit europeanblockchainforum.eu/reports, and you can read our previous reports on the European blockchain startup landscape, central bank digital currencies, and up next, the energy efficiency of blockchain ecosystems. As part of the process of writing and researching about the reports, we're organizing similar presentations to incorporate feedback that will be provided by the experts and the community, making sure that it's totally grassroots effort. So we highly encourage those who are attending today's event and they have a use case to share or a feedback to incorporate to reach out to the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum team to express their interest to engage. As part of this process, we also engage with our experts, the councils of experts that are constantly providing their feedback and expertise. In this particular report, we have As Costello, Alexia Nania, Isan Roy, Giannis Graubins, and Daniel Segom. We're gathering also feedback from the academia, from the Institute for the Future by the University of Nicosia and the Center for Distributed Ledger Technology from the University of Malta. This report, I will dare to say that it incorporates on-chain data. It was totally different with the previous reports, and now we have confidence that the data we present are accurate since are all monitored and represented on public blockchains. For this scope, we are getting and tracking data from DApp Radar, non-fungible NFT stats, DApp, NFT evaluations, and other, while we have industry experts such as Mr. Polemitis, Dr. Elul, and other who will provide with their insights. We're going to start the report with an overview and the definitions, trying to provide a basic theoretical framework to facilitate the introduction of more advanced concepts in follow-up sections. In the definition of NFTs, we try to provide a concrete and platform-agnostic definition for the terminology, discuss the basic characteristics of NFTs, especially those that are universal cross-platforms, introduce a framework for taxonomizing NFTs, and also address the question, why are NFTs interesting and if the industry has potential and real substance. Right now, as Mr. Polomitis presented earlier, NFTs are getting traction. This traction is monitored by the available data. But what has really contributed to the NFT adoption at such a large scale? Among our results is the unique monetization avenue with a transparent proof of ownership, this conversion of asset from virtual to fiat currency, improvements in UI and UX introduced lately by the marketplaces and the NFT startups, the adoption of NFTs in the gaming industry, one of the industries that is contributed to real users, the possibility of monetizing virtual rewards, the accessibility. Anyone can create an NFT. It's totally decentralized, and anyone can buy and sell in secondary marketplaces. Also, the creators are not bounded in a specific platform protocol, since they can use multiple front-end or smart contracts to engage. And finally, is the economic empowerment of collectors in emerging economies. From our observation, though, and monitoring the visits across different marketplaces and especially games, we see that there is also another reason why NFTs have really scaled and the user base has been extended. And this is no other than the economic empowerment of collectors and gamers in emerging economies. There's a lot of discussion that in countries such as Malaysia, Mexico, Cuba, and other, if someone dedicates 8 hours to work without specific skills, and someone who is a scientist, they might even make more money due to the appreciation of cryptocurrencies that involve to those metaverse augmented reality video games. So this is definitely one reason that we see a spike of new users. Then, as part of our report, we try to provide the history of NFTs, which is starting with the colored coins on the Bitcoin network. And we see this as the forefront of the NFT movement. Later, with the establishment of ERC20 token standard and how visionaries such as CryptoKitties and others identified the challenges of the ERC20 token, and they have worked to create the ERC721 token. Then we see the merge of CryptoKitties and CryptoPunks. You will see that even today's hype, the CryptoKitties remain the top event of the industry in terms of volume and the users that have been involved with this particular game. And finally, we monitor the latest months evolve of the NFT ecosystem. A core value proposition of our report, I will try to be very brief because we have a panel presenting the use cases later, has been to identify as many use cases as possible. It has been a little bit hectic to identify every single use cases that we have noticed. That's why in the report we took the decision to only include those that they get some traction, they are somehow validated, and they're reputable. if we really want to extend to every particular use cases that is considered NFT, most probably we need hundreds of pages to include all those. We see that anything requiring verifiable provenance, ownership, authenticity, custodial on-chain, off-chain representation, and other broad majority of non-fungible items when gathered on or offline. Some of the most characteristic use cases is identity reputation, tickets, access permission control, I will say also inheritance, property deeds, in-game assets, supply provenance logistics, historical records. We see already major newspapers creating their archives as NFT tokens, licenses, certificates, loyalty points, SIMs, real-world asset NFTs, domains, blockchain domains, collectibles, and digital content. Up next, we monitor the NFT marketplaces. Right now, we have noticed about 30 marketplaces that have real traction, but if we counter every single market, we might get easily more than 200 NFT marketplaces. The goal from identifying and collecting all the marketplaces is to gather information on market structure and growth, including size, value, volume, and user activity. Define which are the core marketplaces in case regulators or other persons and collectives they want to actively engage to learn more about the industry, to analyze the NFT token market capitalization and sales volume, discuss top NFT tokens, their purpose, capitalization, and perspectives, and also discuss new niche marketplaces. Here there is, as mentioned, we can monitor easily which marketplace has traction. Of course, not every single NFT activity is currently monitored because those tracking services, they haven't extended report for all networks, all blockchain networks, and especially layer 2. Nonfungible.com provides, I will say, the most accurate data since they create from many resources. Right now, we see that we have more than 177 active wallets. As active wallets, we consider unique users, though in the blockchain world is typical one user to maintain more than one cryptographic wallets. The number of buyers is approximately 9,040. This means that buyers are usually buying more than one. Also, we see that the user base of sellers is significantly lower, and the total value that of USD that it has been traded in the last quarter is 754 million, which is impressive. Here also we can see the total number of NFT sales from 2017 to 2021. As you can see, the biggest spike is during the CryptoKitties launch. Also, here we see the NFT sector sales in €1,000. Initially, we see that most of the categories are related to the collectible and games, but right now there is another category that gets real traction, which is no other than sport collectibles. And we're going to present later that also the funding for sport-related NFTs has really increased. A major part of the report is to identify all the token standards. Obviously, we need to start our briefing from the Ethereum ecosystem. ERC 721 is the most frequently used token standard. It incorporates on the 2 years experience of the Ethereum improvement proposal, ERC 20. Obviously, the previous version is insufficient for tracking NFTs because each asset is distinct, whereas each of quantity of tokens is identical. This is the role of fungible tokens. The 721 is a free open standard that describes how to build non-fungible or unique tokens on the Ethereum blockchain. The ERC 1998, which is an extension of the previous, and the key identities that is composable. And finally, the ERC 1155, which is incorporated by the engine team, allows users to register fungible and non-fungible tokens. And this token standard was developed with games in mind, where fungible tokens would represent a transactional currency in a game, and the NFTs could represent in-game collectibles and exchangeable assets. Other Ethereum competitors have developed their own standards. The report is not going to list every particular layer 1 and layer 2 blockchain, and especially those that they use the Ethereum standards adopted to their network, but we're going to focus and present other type of standards that vary a little bit by the previous. One of those is the NEAR. I'm afraid that we don't have enough time to go through all the standards, but they will be available in the report. And what is really surprising and showcasing the real traction that the NFT movement is getting is there are a couple new generation blockchains that received funding recently and are dedicated in just NFTs and gaming assets. A couple of those is Infinity by Engine, Flow, and other. Also, we can, in the report, we name the latest funding rounds, those of 2021. Here I'm just presenting some recent, most of those took the last 3 months. But the report is going to provide concrete numbers about the funding received by NFT companies. The most impressive one is Sorar. Is not confirmed yet, but they received 500 million funding. It's a French sports-related NFT platform, and the valuation is going to be 3.8 billion. And also, the previous week, OpenSea, one of the actually the biggest NFT marketplace today, received 100 million funding with 1.5 billion valuation. Here, I just want to briefly suggest the geography. In Europe, we see Spain, France, Italy, Portugal, and Ireland. Sorry for the typo. Getting the most traction in terms of NFTs. And I will conclude my presentation with the challenges. We don't really believe that there are really important challenges right now from our research. The cybersecurity incidents are limited and more related with the platform rather with the protocols. High gas fees, there are already many blockchains solving that. Similarly with energy consumption. Maybe the biggest challenge for NFTs is the establishing legal ownership of assets represented as an NFT token, and also accessibility challenges for blockchain illiterate users. When it comes to substance, more than 100 marketplaces with a working product. And the most important element is that today artists, consumers, collectors, and investors are already benefiting from the new opportunities that NFTs enable in the areas of digital art, music, movies, collectibles, DeFi, and even real-world assets. Thank you, and looking forward to hearing your feedback. And if someone wants to engage with our report, please reach out. Up next, we're going to host our panel with notable NFTs use cases, moderated by Ash Costello. Thank you.
Thanks, Nico, and thank you for presenting the report. I'm part of the report, and I'm looking forward to reading the full thing when it's published. So thank you for the preview. So I'm going to be talking to you today. Well, I'm going to be moderating a panel with 4 people who are undertaking some really interesting projects, NFT projects. First of all, we have Jed Grant, who is an investor and entrepreneur. He's also the CEO of KYC3, a Luxembourg-based fintech providing smart solutions for compliance and counterparty risk management for alternative investment, private equity, and virtual asset managers. He was named in the top 200 fintech leaders in Europe by Lattice 80 in March of 2018 and also in 2019 as a top EU blockchain expert by Blockpool. Lokesh Rao is the CEO and founder of Trace Network. He has over 12 years of experience in enterprise technology. He's been actively involved in enterprise DLT and blockchain solutions since 2017, including in the luxury, lifestyle, and fashion segments. Warren Sample is the Chief Strategy Officer for Vorto Gaming AB in Sweden. Although he's originally from Silicon Valley, he's now based in Finland and is working on global initiatives. He has a comprehensive background stemming from business, commercial, and high-growth strategy leadership, spanning 25 years of experience across the US, Europe, and Asia, including years of hands-on emerging markets experience, identifying early opportunities, and developing solutions which support fast user adoption. He's also adept at understanding the psychology of the market fit. He is a serial entrepreneur over the last decade with extensive experience in solution innovation across fintech, artificial intelligence, DLT technology, crypto wallet assets, and tokenomics and ICOs. He has created models responsible for lifting $1.2 billion off the streets and pulling in millions more of underbanked people firmly into the digital economy. Last, we have Theo Dunas. So Dr. Dunas is a registered and chartered architect and the Learning Excellence Leader at the Scott Sutherland School of Architecture and Built Environment at RGU. There, he directs the MSc in Advanced Architectural Design, and he also orchestrates the school's efforts in digitization. His research expertise encompasses blockchain, generative and parametric systems with a tight orchestration between design and fabrication. He is currently directing ArcChain. That's a project that seeks to establish a decentralized building information modeling toolset and mechanisms for the AEC industry. He also conducts research in design for fabrication and assembly through a series of projects in robotic fabrication of timber components for buildings. Additionally, he is the director in the RGU spin-out rubo.co.uk, which has a purpose to fabricate buildings and houses out of cross-laminated timber. And he's also the CEO with AthensLab.io, crypto assets venture laboratory. So I am Ash Costello. I'm a member of the expert panel of the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum. I specialize in privacy for blockchain organizations in particular. And as Nico mentioned, I'm part of the NFT work group producing that report. I am a lawyer, formerly global head of legal for MUFG Investor Services, and now working in privacy, building out a due diligence and risk assessment tool to analyze privacy in blockchain organizations. I'm also an author, and my third book is coming out in August, and they are called What's Hot in Blockchain and Crypto. So let us start. Jed, would you like to talk us through what you're working on?
Sure, Ash, thank you. Let me just get set up here. Please excuse if I'm a bit groggy. We're coming up on 6 in the morning here in California. I am Jed Grant. I'm the CEO and founder of KYC3. Let me just share something entertaining for you to look at while I talk. And what I'm doing is building Peer Mountain. And Peer Mountain does to knowledge what Bitcoin does to money. Non-fungible trust tokens enable the exchange of trust in transactions, and we're using this as a way to exchange trust. I've been contemplating this problem since 2006. In 2014 and 15, the design became apparent with blockchain technology. After that started to get adopted. In 2017, I filed a patent on the peer chain technology. So this is a project I've been thinking about and working on for quite some time. Personally, I have 30 years of technology experience. I've worked at NATO as an IT section chief. I'm an entrepreneur, software engineer. I've worked 10 years as an executive director of a CSSF regulated savings and loan in Luxembourg, so I'm very familiar with regulatory requirements. I'm also the founder of a number of nonprofits, the Institute for Financial Integrity and Sustainability. I'm a founding board member of InfraChain. I'm a founder of Let's Block. I'm a member of the ANACPA Privacy Working Group and the Finance Working Group. Also on the EU blockchain expert panel from this organization, which I'm very proud of. I'm a founder of the Open Crypto Alliance, working closely with Square and COPA on that. That's an intellectual property protection organization designed to keep blockchain open and free. With Peer Mountain, the exchange of information requires a disjointed network today of third-party trust providers. So we're working with notaries, DocuSign, digital identity providers, this kind of thing. And what I believe is that NFTs can replace much of the trusted information exchange that we do today in a decentralized and open ecosystem. So you'll never have to worry about cross-border validity of information because it's all on a global system, which is provided on a blockchain. You can conduct DeFi business without fear of compliance violations because you can use NFTs in a DeFi transaction. You can avoid GDPR issues because you make the data subject into the data owner and the custodian of the data. You can record consent, exchange, and compliance validity all on chain, and you can keep all of the private information off chain while you do this. With this technology, what we're able to do is we're able to reliably match a blockchain address with a physical person and issue the NFT to that address. This enables instant consumption of regulated services, even in a secure and pseudo or even fully anonymous manner when you get into using zero knowledge proofs and having the trust provider, of course, maintain the knowledge, but the service provider actually doesn't need to have full knowledge of who the customer is in that case. What this will do is deliver a permissionless and open ecosystem architecture so anyone can play, anyone can add value. You can spin up a node and be part of it, or you can just register one of the roles or multiple roles and be part of it. The recognition of all the value exchange is settled on chain in cryptocurrency. That is also one of the transforming things of this technology, is that we can settle value instantly and at the same time as the transaction globally. Governance as well of the ecosystem is managed on chain. So the holders of certain governance tokens will be able to make governance decisions on the architecture that we're building. We're currently approaching MVP status. And as soon as we have a mainnet system, we're on testnet right now. As soon as it's mainnet, we intend to open source and begin building in a very open and collaborative manner with the industry. Peer chain is built on trustless nodes. They're incentivized to work positively towards strengthening the ecosystem of trust. It's a layer 2 protocol that can be anchored to any blockchain. Today, we are building on RSK and we have Ethereum, and we're using the RSK token bridge to move value back and forth. But for the most part, the transactions and the NFTs are happening on the RSK network. This allows us to have very, very low transaction fees. For those of you who are not familiar with RSK, it's a great project out of Argentina, run by Diego, a friend of mine. And it's merge mined with Bitcoin. So it's very interesting. It's Ethereum virtual machines on Bitcoin blockchain. In the Peer Mountain ecosystem, there are 3 roles. There's a consumer, a service provider, and a trust provider. Anyone can be any of those roles. You can be multiple roles as well. For example, I would be a consumer when I go to my bank. I would be a trust provider when I'm providing KYC services to that or another bank. And I could be a service provider if I was providing an advisory service or some other service. The bank is the service provider to me when I go to the bank. The consumers assert facts. So I say I am so-and-so. The trust provider validates those facts. So it's a very standard procedure of assertion and attestation that we're enabling, and we're doing this with NFTs. And then the service providers choose who to trust and who to deliver service to. Each party gets remunerated for participating in the good function of the trust ecosystem, so the tokenomics are all built on incentivized behavior. And as time goes on, the reputation for trustworthiness will materialize as an immutable record on chain. So this is very much like the real world trust. It takes decades to build a great reputation, and it only takes minutes to wreck it. It's the same when you're doing it in an immutable on-chain manner. So the knowledge, though, that the trust is placed in becomes NFTs, digital bearer assets. So we call these non-fungible trust tokens in the Peer Mountain use case. And every trusted element in the environment is cryptographically signed and provable. All the knowledge is encrypted and secure. So the knowledge is the off-chain data that the NFT refers to. We're never putting any personal or private information on chain. What starts on chain stays on chain, and then the rest is just referred to off-chain by the NFT. Only the bearer of the NFT or an individual who's authorized by the bearer through a digitally signed message with a time-locked cryptographic key can access the off-chain knowledge. The off-chain knowledge can be static, it can be dynamic. In the case of a KYC, there are both elements, for example. If you had an NFT for KYC, you could provide that to an exchange when opening an account, and you could instantly begin trading, provided that the exchange trusts the trust provider. And of course, the static elements of that are my identity and the confirmation that I am who I say I am. And the dynamic element of that is the risk screening element, where daily checks are being done, or even more frequently, to verify that I am not on any sanctions or risk-related lists. So with this architecture, as a service provider, you can accept consumers immediately and even anonymously eventually. As a trust provider, you can deliver massive scale very quickly. So you can provide trust globally and instantly. And so that's what Peer Mountain is. It's all NFT powered. It's very much on the idea of you own your information. So you're the holder of the NFT, and the bearer of that NFT can pass it to a party that needs to have access to that information. When the NFTs are burned, the off-chain data is no longer accessible and effectively deleted. So I'm at the stage where we are looking for early adopters to begin testing. We have an MOU, and you can start using Peer Mountain later this year. So if that's of interest later on, feel free to look me up and reach out, and I'll get you access to our technology before we open source potentially. So that's a brief overview of what I'm doing.
Thanks, Jed. That's really interesting. Thanks for taking us through. And Lokesh, can you please take us through what you're working with at Trace Network?
Okay, am I audible to you guys?
Yep, good to go.
Thank you, Ash. Hi, guys. I'm Lokesh Rao, CEO and co-founder of Trace Network. Today, I'm going to talk about how Trace Network is enabling fashion for metaverse. Before that, I would like to go back to the history of non-fungible tokens, which we also call NFTs. It enables selling and possession of unique art digitally. And connoisseurs of art have been buying these NFTs at massive prices. Some of it got sold for millions of dollars, like Beeple got sold for $69 million, just because of its exclusivity. Now, it's not very far when NFTs would be valued on the basis of its utilities. Now, coming back to fashion NFTs, many of you would be thinking, what future has these fashion NFTs has? What is the point of possessing these fashion NFTs? How it's going to change the way we interact with the real world? So in this pandemic, I really don't need to tell you that most of our lives are increasingly spent online. Study shows that more than 15% people globally are spending more than 10 hours online. So that's a really key. And that's not going to change actually. And as we do spend more and more time online, buying virtual goods has become more mainstream. And I think it's a real interesting sort of reflection of whatever people value, they begin to create ownership around. And I think because of we value online so much, it's really important that we understand ways of building our ownership. Digital fashion products have been increasingly getting attention. Recently, we have seen brands like L'Oreal bringing the new line of digital beauty products, which can be applied on person's face in the Zoom meeting calls. Similarly, various other platforms are doing similar kind of thing. However, all these utilities are limited to only these single platforms. And we intend to extend the use of digital fashion to various metaverse. Now with Trace Network, we are enabling more sophisticated things like avatars, where the fashion NFTs can be pulled on individual avatar and can be integrated with metaverse like gaming platforms, virtual meetings, where you can go and use your avatars. And because now the businesses with the fashion brands are struggling with supply chain issues and their sales are plunging, despite of having a loyal customer base, it's inevitable for them to look for other avenues to generate sales. The brand needs window to digital world. They are open to learn and do experiment with metaverse NFTs. So Trace Network is providing infrastructure on blockchain for these brands to be able to create and sell limited edition and exclusive product NFTs for their loyal communities. So brands would be able to create new category of digital fashion products in the form of NFTs to increase their possibility of sales. And since it incurs very low overhead costs, so better margins. These brands would be able to earn royalties on resale of these NFTs. And these NFTs can be sold on Trace Network's NFT marketplace Bling, or it can be sold on any other NFT platforms as well. So the consumers, why they would be buying it? So for them, they would be able to own these exclusive products digitally, which is being sold by these brands directly. So it's giving them a sense of owning exclusive products directly from brand. And also these customers would be able to wear these NFTs on their own avatars, which can be shared on various social media platforms or metaverses. Trace Network would enable standards which would allow integration with various metaverses to enable movement and application of these NFTs. If we look at global sales, the percentage population believing possession of NFTs is increasing exponentially. And today, the evolution of this space has enabled various use cases of these NFTs, which is beyond just possessing them. I believe with current evolution rate in the space, very soon Trace Network would let you own a luxury car NFT and use it in the gaming metaverse. I think, yeah, this is what we are trying to do. And soon, by end of July, early first week of August, we'll be launching our platform. Looking forward to engaging you guys over there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lokesh. And Warren, would you please introduce us to your NFT project?
Yeah, thanks everybody for your time today. So it was mentioned a little bit in some of the previous discussions around gaming and so forth. So Vorto Gaming is actually a company that was born from a merger of a pretty successful sort of Nordic publishing house and a Baltic gaming studio. And we came to the ideal of, instead of building infrastructure and tools for a single IPs or a group of them, that we'd like to start to look at how we could use blockchain-enabled technology to service the width of the market. So we're actually building a platform called Vorto Network, and I'll give you the sort of 20, 30-second sort of pitch on this process because it's really easy to digest. There's about 2.8, 2.9 billion perhaps have grown during the last year in the pandemic as people look for refuge for entertainment and so forth. Gamers worldwide who do an estimated about 181 billion in revenue for the industry. That's going to be growing substantially even over the next 4 years to reaching around 295 billion by 2026. But the long and short of it is that revenue, that value proposition, that growth in the industry is built on those 2.8 billion or 2.9 billion players out there. And we think that there's a better way to sort of service the market while also starting to adopt the role of virtual economy. So instead of these 2.9 billion people fueling that much revenue that's going to the hands of a few, we believe a wider and more distributed equilibrium in the economy will support even more engagement and more growth for every actor on the supply chain. So we sort of focused on blockchain-enabled hub for games and marketplace that allows players to be rewarded for their time and attention. And I think this is clearly where it comes back into the NFT process. So think about it this way. Gamers are already absolutely enthusiastic, passionate. They're spending money on doing things they love, and also more importantly, the time. But that goes to the benefit of the studios. So we kind of changed the game rules of the game a bit. And instead of the players working only for the game, we want the games to work for the players. And as they move through their beloved games and titles, you know, earning, winning competition, finding rare resources, crafting those into in-game digital items, the difference, and it was mentioned earlier here, is a big shift from the movement of having the right of that digital item or in-game item to use to a actual asset that they own. And it's funny, when we were promoting this session here that we're all attending today, I was promoting that on social web, and a few people asked me, boy, yeah, I just really can't sort of understand this NFT and this sort of crypto thing and so forth. And it really just occurred to me, this is a very simple story. People have access to digital goods and rights, but they don't own it. And that is the simplification of demystifying NFTs. The ability to have those rights or objects, but they're now in your possession to use, to trade, to delete, to give away, or to sell and trade. So coming back to what we do with Vorto Network, we are looking to build a sort of marketplace and trading platform that not only gives games the toolbox to generate in-game items through a tokenized process and generate the NFTs that can be sold, earned, or provided to the use base, but equally a secondary marketplace for the gamers worldwide to be able to use their time and attention to generate these digital assets, generate these NFTs, and use that as an ownership that they can monetize. And it sort of been speaking at a few panels about this as well, sort of globally, the ideal that gaming can be a source of income or even a gig economy sort of work effort is really a realization. And I think it was mentioned earlier in the Philippines, Malaysia, and others, this is becoming really true. And you got to kind of think that the ideal that if I'm a lazy gamer who doesn't have the time and somebody else is dedicated to a craft that they love, they're going to spend 10, 20, 30 hours, whatever the case may be. That's labor, that's skill, that's talent. And if they are able to produce things within the games that are relevant for that effort, they should be monetized and be able to be rewarded. And if I come along and want to buy that to skip forward in the progress in time, then that is a great natural fit. So that's the summary of Vorto Network in terms of what we're launching, this hub for blockchain-enabled games, connecting the studios to the players and giving the players equally an ability to generate valuable assets through their processes. And we believe that, going back to this ideal that the gaming industry is growing to a massive, monumental 295 billion a year in 2026, we believe that will be dwarfed by the virtual economy, which will sit on top of that industry. So that's to be seen, and good to join the discussion today.
Thanks so much, Warren. That's really fascinating. And it's one of the topics that we covered actually in the first book. So I'm going to ask you more questions about that when we get to the Q&A section later on. Theo, over to you.
Thank you, As. It's wonderful to be part of the panel and learning about these exciting use cases. Our use case mostly has to do with the physical world and essentially the buildings we're all in, we use every day. We are a research team that is composed of people from Robert Goddard University in Aberdeen, Cardiff University in Wales, and Sia Yatong Liverpool University in Suzhou, China. And essentially, we are trying to solve a couple of problems for the architectural, engineering, and construction industry, which is a kind of wasteful and fragmented industry in a sense. We started working on using blockchain technologies in integration with building information modeling, which is the software we use to design, construct, and operate buildings, because we thought it's a really good fit. Blockchain is a really good fit for coordination problems of construction. in essence, our work on NFTs revolves around two particular aspects. We have developed essentially digital tools that allow us to connect the tools we use to design buildings with smart contracts that hold NFTs. We are looking at the creation of dynamic NFTs that can encapsulate a new building detail or building configuration, where the architect no longer needs to design, prototypes in full buildings, but is free to create their own innovative solutions to, say, a facade or a structural system, and then publish this as an NFT. Whereas then each architect that will use that information will have to pay the original creator. But also additionally, any kind of changes that happen to that IP will be able to be recorded and then compensate anybody else that essentially contributes to improving the design. By publishing this, you can kind of have the best of both worlds, right? Sharing the information, any kind of innovative solution you have, but at the same time making sure that your design is compensated in a good fashion for your efforts, and so on and so forth. And we believe that this will essentially allow networks and markets that architects and designers did not participate in beforehand to be open to them, or even create new markets and new business and operation models for architects. At the same time, we've used essentially the same digital tools to create a novel manner through which architects can create NFTs out of a whole design, but also NFTs out of each unique building component that goes into their design, tracked essentially through a composable topology in the building. So we have one NFT that represents a whole building, and then a series of NFTs that represent in a topological hierarchy everything else in the building. And this allows us the creation of an information layer that locates every building component through a smart contract, and can be used in two manners. From one aspect, we can create a cadastre of building components that will be mutable and resilient long time in the future. So when we need to reuse these buildings, we do have the information to know what components they have, what kind of materials they contain. And we have essentially the information for a bank of materials forward into the future. The other use case, and this will allow us essentially to reduce waste and reduce embodied carbon in new buildings into the future. The other aspect of this has a fantastic use case and potential is the use of NFTs into digital twins of existing or new buildings, combined with building information models, where the NFT and the building component is owned by, say, a service provider that own and have to maintain the NFT and the building component. Or even cases where the smart contracts themselves that hold the NFTs act automatically and maintain, trigger the maintenance or upgrade of a building. So in both cases, you have essentially new operating models, new business models out of these tools, and the potential for creating new markets and unlocking potential in a really traditional, really fragmented industry. I'm happy to have a conversation with all panelists on these and any other kind of interplay between the physical and the digital world.
Thanks, Theo. That was something I was thinking of asking you. How difficult is it to connect the physical and the digital world through NFTs?
The digital aspect is not really that difficult, going from a digital design onto an NFT. But maintaining the connection through potentially Internet of Things technologies is the difficult part. But it's not impossible. So it just needs the establishment of essentially new tools and new bridges, let's say, between the two.
Someone has just asked a question in the Q&A. Are there any certificates for that, Theo?
Are there any certificates? Yes, we can essentially issue certificates for any kind of action that takes place between the physical and the digital world, and this can validate essentially an action that has taken place, or potentially even validate something that has not taken place, like maintenance, which would be would open essentially an operator to liabilities.
And Warren, you were talking about the mainstream development of NFTs and the adoption. We've seen a lot of adoption already in the art world, but I think in the use cases that everyone here is talking about today, and in some of the use cases that I've been researching for the reports, there's some, it's kind of extrapolated out into, for example, as Theo was talking about, into building. And what do you see will be the critical factor to bring it into mainstream adoption?
Yeah, I think there's two observations I could make briefly. One, a few years ago, literally internet years, 2 or 3 years ago, which is quite a lot more in internet years, all of the use cases kind of focused on the mechanics of blockchain and how to get it to work and so forth. And it kind of missed the mark about sort of making it usable from a sort of human and adoption point of view. So I think fast forward a few years now, we see not only in the panel here, a lot of really vibrant and good use cases that are applicable to the real world. So I think one step is the blockchain technology has finally reached sort of real world implementation, and not just the sort of geeky, fun, very complicated sort of back end mechanics of it all. We still need to work a lot harder on some of these use cases, not only just again to make them business sort of viable, but to drive real benefits to users, be it B2B or consumers. So that is some work ahead, but I'm just saying it looks better. But getting back to maybe some of the enablers that still need to sort of be focused on, when we talk about like NFT marketplaces and trading, a lot of them still take a pretty well-wired individual to navigate them, getting set up, getting cashed in, operating, and it's too complicated still. For mainstream adoption, we're definitely going to have to do what all the IT and the experts know how to do, hide the complexity, because simplicity scales, complexity doesn't. And I think there is some work to be done to make this seamless. It's the old adage that all of us know. I really just don't need to know about the engine to be able to drive the car, but I better know where the brake and the gas are, right? So we do need to continue to focus on making it seamless and easy to use to get people adopted, but do that with the growing perception of what is that real benefit to the end user who's touching that. And again, that's going to be varied from business to business versus consumer, but I think those two aspects are important. Seamlessness and always keeping the end user in thought in terms of, are we driving a benefit? If the answer is yes on both of those, this will move like gangbusters.
I agree. And I think even in the past couple of weeks, I've spoken to some people who are launching exchanges, which are, NFT kinds of exchanges, which are much easier to use. So it's pretty much like, we had the original crypto, the banking system, where it was complicated. You had to have wallets. You had to have, in some instances, meet people in a Taco Bell parking lot to be able to get your Bitcoin back in the early days. So now we're seeing the same thing, I think, with NFTs. It's kind of going to blockchain 2.0. We're getting the exchanges. In the crypto side, we've Kraken, we've Gemini, Binance, etc. And on the NFT side, there's beginning to be exchanges to do exactly what you say there, simplify the adoption and simplify the engagement. Jed, you have your mic on. Did you want to mention something there?
No, but I was reflecting on what was being said. And yes, we are. If you were an early user of the internet and you remember dial-up and WinSock and these kind of things, we are at that phase. So there is a requirement of certain technical skill and making that really hidden so that you don't need to see it and you can just use it is where it's going. I think in 10 years, people won't even talk about NFTs. They'll just be using a system, using a thing, and it's just there.
Absolutely. And how do you think that translates into information exchange?
It does indeed. Yeah, NFTs do a very interesting thing to information. They make knowledge a bearer asset. Today, one of the problems in the digital world is scarcity. It's inverse. You can copy digital information left, right, and center, and that's a good thing when we're talking about an idea we want to spread, and that's why social media goes viral. But it's not a good thing when we're talking about our personal information or things we want to keep restricted. And NFTs allow us to turn that private information into a bearer asset so that it doesn't need to be held by a third party. You can own it yourself and you can share it with the people you need to share it with. That's really a compelling change in how we will view the transfer of knowledge and private information.
We've been asked a question in the Q&A, which is there a chance to represent any physical asset representation as knowledge graphs and store them in a secure way in the blockchain? And if so, how would we do this? Does anyone have an answer for that? Or do we want to address that later?
I could try and offer one of the ways we solve part of the problems we are facing. So a building information model is a really complicated construct, and usually the models are really heavy, let's say, in terms of information. So what we do is we create a graph that represents the topological relationships between the buildings, the building components, and that is the closest to a knowledge graph you would have for a physical component of the building. And then we essentially use that to understand which NFT owns another NFT and so on and so forth. And so from that point of view, you can essentially do that. You can take, let's say, your coffee machine, breaking down into parts, create a graph that essentially communicates the relationships, and then use that to either create an NFT out of each component or an NFT of the whole relationship.
One important thing to understand about NFTs is the NFT is the token. It's not actually the object. So, you know, in the case of collectible NFTs, a good way to think of them is the NFT is the signature. It's not the painting, the JPEG. It's the signature of the artist on that work of art. And the NFT points, so in the way an NFT is built is it has a URI that points to off-chain information. So one thing in that question that got my interest was to store them on chain. You don't actually want to store all of that on chain. You want to put a minimum amount of information on chain. So what we're storing on chain is the record of who transacted with who, which address sent the NFT to another address, and certain information like this about the transaction. But the information that the NFT refers to is actually stored off chain, and that can be stored in any of various manners, in a database, on a file store, encrypted as an object, however you want to store that. So the NFT is really the ticket, and it's the pointer to the real object. And doing that digitally is quite simple. You have a URI, you point to off-chain information, and then any information, your Amazon web store can be referred to by an NFT, and you could pass that pointer around. When you get to real world objects, as Theo was talking about, it's much harder to link the real world to the digital world. It's not just an NFT problem, it's a general problem. In Peer Mountain, we're solving that partly with an onboarding. So as a KYC use case, we use face recognition. We generate a face hash. We make sure that that's real liveness. We have liveness testing when that face is taken, so we know it's the real person that is at the device at the moment. And then we have that person sign. So we know that that blockchain address is linked to that physical person. But the only thing that's on the blockchain is that blockchain address. The off-chain information is what confirms that that person is, you know, Bob or Fred or Alice, and that they own the control of that on-chain address. I hope that was clear.
Something similar, and it ties in a way to the projects Theo is working on, is one of the people I've been speaking to as research for the NFT report. They're doing conveyancing by NFT. So we've heard of property by NFT, but conveyancing is a whole other ball game. If anyone has ever bought or sold a house, you know the nightmare that conveyancing is. So doing this by NFT, where your certificates, and this goes back to the question that we were asked, you know, is there a way to kind of a certificate for the NFT or some kind of representation of the NFT? So doing it for real estate, for, you know, immobilier, for property, doing that by NFT is a phenomenal project. They're going to be launching in about 2-3 weeks time, so they will be able to go into the NFT report. But they've been working on this for 4 years with the Department of State in the US, the Treasury, the tax authorities in the US, all the people that you need to kind of approve putting conveyancing, not just on the blockchain, but a transfer of ownership via NFT. So that's a phenomenal, I think, use case of NFTs. And Theo, it ties in quite nicely. If architects are building things as NFTs, that will work, you know, hand in glove with, well, maybe it won't, I'm not a property expert, but it sounds like it'll work hand in glove with the conveyancing. You know, you buy your NFT of your architect project, and then you conveyance your property maybe by NFT, and then we get back to kind of what Warren was talking about, you know, the digital and sorry, it was you, Theo, the digital and the real gap. And then, as you know, Warren and Jed were talking about, kind of matching them. How do you match them? When it comes to property, it's one thing with, Chanel handbags, which is Lokesh's area, but when it's property, it's a whole other ballgame. But there's only one plot of land that NFT relates to. Lokesh, how do you think that relates to your area, the fashion and the luxury goods area? Linking the digital and the real.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yep, you're good.
Yeah. So in terms of relating the NFTs to the real world goods, that's what we are talking, right? So in terms of like the NFTs, like in our context, when we talk about the NFTs, the kind of algorithms we are trying to add into this, which includes like the decaying coefficient, wherein the fashion products like how we use today, so it has some lifespan. So in those terms, in these real world products can have attributes attached to it, and so it cannot go for a longer time. So when we go for reselling of these products, so they somehow so with this algorithm being built into, so these would over the time they would vanish off. And that's how the whole cycle of brand works, wherein they reproduce and the goods continue to come into the fashion life cycle.
You're muted, Ash.
There we go. Jed, there's a question for you in the Q&A. How should we deal with off-chain storage that might suffer from digital obsolescence, unsupported formats over time?
This is an issue. It'll happen potentially. There are a number of projects that are dealing with persistent storage. I mean, you can look at IPFS. It's very exciting, interplanetary file system. You can run, if you're the provisioner of that data store, you can run your own node and you can pin that data on your IPFS server. But then there are projects like Filecoin where you can actually just pay to guarantee the storage, and they have an algorithm for proof of having that data on available off-chain on that store. You can also just keep it like any website. I mean, it's the same problem we deal with websites. It's just a question of persistent storage. I think the most interesting developments in persistent storage are coming from IPFS and the layers on top of IPFS like Filecoin.
Thank you. And Warren, just to go back to something you mentioned during your discussion earlier, you mentioned that people are earning by gaming, which is not new. But how does that? Is there an NFT element in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's at the center of this story. So again, like if we look at the typical gamer out there who literally is spending hundreds of hours on playing and so forth, they already have the concept of doing tasks, collecting items, and then building those items into something unique, whether it's a table or a sword or extra power and so forth and so on. But again, the big shift being that's a database, and I think listing of an item. I think Jed was talking a little bit about this earlier too. The ideal that asset now can be in a different format and linked to the ownership gives me the power over it versus the game. And again, part of that is a dual-edged sword from the user's perspective. Now they've got a way to sell across the community, which maybe some of the studio titles wanted to monopolize. But I think like any economy, whether it's a government or a studio, they realize that when you open up these items and allow people to have the tools to build things, to trade them, to monetize, right? You're building the economy that works that way in the real world. When governments open up the means for people to transact and trade, things grow, and it's not even up to the government. So I think studios have started to also slowly come around to the idea that they don't need to control the items. And in fact, if there's people who can monetize by generating these NFTs and then trading them, they'll actually get even more uptake from the gaming or studio perspective. So again, it comes back to what is the concept of open economy. Closed economies usually strangle And I think that's been the model in gaming, to sort of control the user, control the items. And now we see simply from the use of enabling blockchain technology, a way to kind of open up the economy. And I think that's the brilliance of it.
And it's much, much broader than just gaming. I mean, the attributes of NFTs are, they are a bearer asset. So they're unconfiscatable and uncensorable. So, if I want to sell that sword to you, even though I've been booted off the game for inappropriate behavior, I can still sell you my sword. They can't take it from me when they boot me. So that's important. But when you're talking about knowledge and KYC and this kind of thing where I'm working, that's also very important. It means that my data cannot be taken from me. It means I can share my data with whoever I want to share it with, and nobody can censor that transfer of information.
And openness, whether the economy or just openness to information exchange, right? That's the key element here that I think blockchain enables. And getting back to sort of the EU anyway, we know regulation will come around sooner or later. Some regulation is good because then everybody knows where they stand. But I think it comes back to why this will stay and grow and continue to be something 20, 30, 40 years in the future is it's the openness. And I think that's the key takeaway.
Yeah, I think so. Theo, what do you think the key takeaway would be regarding NFTs?
I think what we're discussing is really exciting in terms of creating essentially open markets that are essentially the digital world are not controlled by the companies that created them. But also there is an ethical aspect of, and I'll take the example of the players here, of them investing hours, on the game and then owning the game, literally, right? So you have when in certain of those virtual worlds, companies make decisions and change things for the better or for the worse, you get a reaction by the users, right? And I think all of this will allow essentially the users to have a little bit better control of these virtual lives and the virtual gaming that they will be doing. And I think in the end, it will allow for a much more peer-to-peer economy to develop compared to what we have at the moment, where there are certain strong players and their decisions essentially affect the markets and behaviors of people on the ground. So I think the idea here is that we will be able to have a much more horizontal peer-to-peer economy, whether this relies only on digital assets or the representation of digital assets for physical assets.
Thanks, Theo. Lukesh, what did you want to give us as your key takeaway?
Hello, I just joined back, so can you repeat the question?
What's your key takeaway from, what do you want to leave everyone with as your key takeaway?
So yeah, so the future holds a lot for the NFT areas, and there are a lot of avenues to be built on, more standards to be arrived on, so that there is a seamless exchange of these NFTs into various metaverses and various ecosystems, so that the more value it can give to the customers who are owning it, just apart from just owning it, it should be driving more values to them.
Thank you. And finally, Jed, your key takeaway, please.
I think the underlying technology is what is the real evolution and revolutionary thing here. The publication of the Bitcoin white paper is going to be seen, I believe, in many years in the future as an event in human history as relevant as the invention of the printing press. Digital scarcity, which is what blockchains enable us to have, and NFTs are that digital scarcity attached to a non-fungible item, whereas with cryptocurrencies, it's a fungible representation of value. But all of the use cases that are enabled by this are immense, and we are really only at the very, very beginning. So I expect that we're going to see a lot of very innovative things. We're going to see a lot of very cool things, and 99% of them are not going to work. But the ones that stick are going to transform the way we live on this planet, and they're going to globalize humanity in a way that many people never thought imaginable. And typical Westphalian geography and politics is also going to be eroded by this. And so the NFTs may seem quaint, like digital baseball cards, but what we're looking at here is a technology that is going to transform the politics and the business of the planet.
Agreed. Warren, the last word to you. What would you like to leave us with?
Just following up on Jed's statement, I think that's the greatness of sort of innovation, and it's the opportunity to transform something. It's funny enough, like we all work in the technology space and the business space and so forth and so on. There is that incumbent mindset that things will never change. They kind of are accepted for the way that they are, but it's always a fallacy. And I think that whether we're talking about generally blockchain or the NFT space, I agree wholeheartedly that change is coming, and definitely it will be dramatic. And we will see in 20, 30 years, the obvious, for those who didn't jump on board early, the obvious, like, oh, we should have seen that coming. But definitely, nothing stays constant, change is coming, and boy, hold on to your hat.
Agreed. I think the change from regular technology to blockchain technology, it's like going from, and people talk about fintech, and I'm from the financial services industry, and people are so excited about fintech. But I think going from regular technology to fintech, it's like going from, a horse and cart to putting 4 horses instead of 2 horses on your cart. And then, blockchain, it's not, well, it's going to a car instead of a horse and cart. It's a game changer. It's a whole different world, and it enables so much more. And I think the exciting thing about NFTs, it's people normally, when they hear about blockchain, they hear about Bitcoin scams. And there was a notification yesterday from the the European Parliament that they want to start, stopping the privacy of cryptocurrency. So let's see how they do that. For AML purposes, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. But looking back, I think, so that's the kind of what people think of outside the blockchain, crypto bubble. That's what people think of when they hear Bitcoin, blockchain, the bad side of the fence. And I think NFT is what has captured the public imagination about what blockchain enables. And I think it's kind of the door opener. And people will think, oh, it does good stuff. Kate Moss has an NFT of her sleeping. We have rhino conservation by NFT. You've got drones doing rhino conservation via NFT. You've got NFTs in space. You've got NFT, for luxury, for buildings, for identity, and also for gaming. You've got NFTs across the board. And this is just a small sample. Nico is collating more in the report, which will be available in a few weeks' time. So I will leave it there for now. This is our use cases. More to come in that report. But for the time being now, I'm going to leave you with Nina, who's going to take you on to the next panel.
All right. So I may take the floor now, right? And invite my panelists to come up as well. Many thanks to the EU Observatory and Forum for picking up the topic of NFTs, which I also believe is important. My name is Nina Siegler, partner at DWF, where I head the Global Blockchain Competence Group. My personal background is in finance and finance regulation, but of utmost personal interest for me are the governance question relating to decentralized systems. I served in various functions in the blockchain and DLT community in the past and also currently, and the one bringing me here today is being part of the expert group of the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum. And alongside of the main NFT report as presented by Nikos earlier today, a number of legal experts within that expert panel formed a subgroup to provide some legal papers on NFTs, the first of which is already published. You can find it on the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum's website, and it contains a legal comparison of token classification applying to NFTs in a number of countries. All of the panelists in this panel are part of that exercise. Actually, also all of the panelists of the following panel, which focuses on financial regulatory. Having said that, I would like to ask my panelists to just briefly introduce yourself. So, Robert, could you take the floor?
Many thanks, Nina, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm from a very, very hot northwest England. I know some of my colleagues are in much hotter countries, but I'm definitely not used to these sorts of temperatures here. So forgive me if I look a little bit flushed today. Yeah, my name is Dr. Robert Herrion. I'm a senior lecturer in law at the Open University Law School here in the UK. I've been dealing or researching more specifically in what broadly conceived blockchain law now for about the last 5 or 6 years, and have written a number of books and articles on the subject, including what I believe is the first monograph on regulation of blockchain that was published in the UK, which was published by Routledge in 2018. So NFTs and tokenization is something that has always sort of been within the remit of my research, but it's been very interesting working recently to see how this is now pulling into focus, especially based on a number of the use cases that we've just been hearing about. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, and maybe to add that, Robert was the responsible author in that report for the common law jurisdiction section. So he's representing that view. And by that, I would like to invite Jim to introduce yourself. I actually, here you are.
So here, hi, Jim Mason. I work in blockchain in a lot of different areas. I'm currently working as a blockchain practice leader for Paramount Software in the US. And we work on implementing different types of both blockchain products and I'll call it custom blockchain solutions for clients, governments, and so on. And I've been fortunate to actually have different roles, I'll say, in my career around blockchain. And one of them started originally building something called a vehicle identity system before MOBI even existed, which is the mobility open blockchain for vehicle identity. So they've actually got a much larger solution today. Part of that group on helping set standards, part of the Hyperledger group as the public sector blockchain leader, manage blockchain meetups for Boston and participate in other meetup forums as well. And then, of course, being an expert on the European blockchain forum is a special honor. And that said, I have mentioned that I worked on different applications in blockchain already. So one of the ones I did was a digital identity and credentials system using the Indy Aries stack for the state of Rhode Island, which is actually modeled after what was done earlier in British Columbia and Ontario. So they've actually open sourced that quite nicely. So we actually piloted that in Rhode Island, did an MVP that was very successful on digital identity and so on. And from that, got into more on blockchain law as we look to, in a sense, figure out what Rhode Island would need to do from a regulation perspective going forward, digital identity assets and so on. And having done a lot of research on US law, I can say that also pays off now that I work on, I'll call it energy action applications on peer-to-peer trading, also in carbon management applications as well, currently got going. And then we finally have a, I'll call it a farm to plate traceability application on blockchain that's in a sense integrating everything, even at the farmer level, all the way up through the retailer. So there's multiple call it projects, and you get different views of, I'll call it both problems and then legal aspects of that. And so having spent a lot of time in the US on the legal side, I'll quickly summarize my area of experience there. And so that's it for me.
Thank you, Jim. That's quite impressive. A huge background. Now, following having Robert from the UK, so Europe, geographically, Jim from the US, I would like to invite you, Andres, to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nina, for giving me the floor now. I'm Andres Chomsik. I'm originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. So been working in the crypto industry for quite some time, from late 2012, early 2013. Obviously, I'm a lawyer. Right now, I'm working as a researcher at the Free University of Brussels in the Law Science, Technology and Society Research Group. Sort of the odd bag in there, looking at fintech, blockchain, and anything that deals with digital finance in general. As a bit of background, and perhaps for those that are interested into that, that has helped a lot in drafting the report on the regulatory aspects from the financial side, We recently conducted a research, basically looking at the whole Latin America, at digital identity, blockchain, and cryptocurrencies. Unfortunately, it's only in Spanish, but those that are interested can reach out to me, and I can probably help you out with any translation that is necessary. But it's almost a reference in the region in that regard. Yeah, basically, I just don't want to steal more time with the introduction, so we can jump right into the discussion.
All right, thank you very much. So you see, we have 3 continents represented on this panel to showcase the variety of legal views towards this topic. As mentioned by Nikos in his report, one of the main challenges is establishing legal title in the asset that is represented by an NFT. I would actually like to add the legal issue commences already with the question of ownership in a token as such. While there was much focus in the past years on financial regulation, now actually leading to the MiCA regulation being proposed and presumably shortly decided upon, the civil law aspects are still widely not really considered by lawmakers. And as part of the triennial work program, a UNIDROIT working group has been established with the objective to develop a future legal instruments containing principles and legislative guidance in the area of private law for digital assets. And in this working group, we aim to get our heads around questions like what is or should be an ownership-like estate in a digital asset for which you can claim being protected by law, like what kind of protection of innocent acquirers should be in place, enabling acquisitions in good faith. I already recognized in the chat that there was a question relating to that, and we discussed their concepts of control and custody in digital assets. So that's maybe something to look into. I believe one initial problem report has already been published on the UNIDROIT website. Now, Antonis, in his keynote speech, stressed that NFTs or NFT is a horizontal technology meant to represent something that is unique. And I would like to ask Jim, does that reflect or mirror your understanding of NFTs? And what is your example? It seems that we lost Jim. So maybe one of you.
Nina, I'm back. I apologize. I'm here.
Okay. All right. So what is your understanding of NFTs? How would you characterize NFTs?
All right. Can I share my screen?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I believe.
Tell me if you can see it. So.
Yeah.
We do. My controls. There we go. Drop this. So I'm just briefly, you're right, I have a concept of what NFTs are, which I'm sure has some differences with what other speakers have already presented. So just in general, I want to talk about what NFT concepts are, and then turn it back, and at whatever time it's appropriate, I'll come back and talk about US regulation. But from my perspective, an NFT basically represents the rights to an asset, period. And the rights, that asset can be either digital or physical. It's not specific, it can be either. The only point of it is that in theory, the asset is unique in some respect, so that the token representing the asset would be considered non-fungible. So as an example, I can have a bag of potatoes or a bag of apples, and there's probably nothing unique about those. So it wouldn't be represented by a non-fungible token, if that makes sense. The other thing is the NFT, in theory, because it does represent rights to an asset, allows pursuit of legal remedies where those rights are violated. So what kind of rights could an NFT have potentially represent for the asset that it's related to? You could have control, you could have access rights, ownership rights, possession rights, transformation, transfer of the asset physically, usage rights, naming rights, and even legal custody. All of these things do exist in concept today in existing contracts in the US without NFTs, right? So you, in theory, you'd say, I don't necessarily have to have an NFT. I already have contracts today in the US that represent all of those rights. So when I turn around and say some potential NFT use cases, some of the more interesting or different ones, I'd say right to name a stadium for a year. We have in the US, you pay money for that. In my case, I'm working on carbon offsets from, I'll quote a tree farm as an example, and say those are NFT, could be NFTs, if you will, could be registered that way. We've already talked about, other speakers have mentioned land titles, which in the US, we already have one state that's already moved ahead with land titles, Illinois, in one of the counties, Cook County there. And it's a very good application, as mentioned earlier, for NFTs. It's a very logical one. So putting land titles on a blockchain makes sense. That's one of the use cases we looked at in the state of Rhode Island, actually. And then even things like my bad jokes, they're really bad. They're probably unique and they're pretty bad. But if I wanted to, I could make that, in a sense, in theory, an asset, try to protect it, and represent rights around my bad jokes, if you will, or my collection of bad jokes, which wouldn't be worth much. But you could represent those as some sort of an asset and then associate it to an NFT. So conceptually, why do I need an NFT? I already have contracts, and contracts, in a sense, can cover all of those rights that we talked about earlier. So there's a contract that relates to an asset. There may be fees associated with the contract. And then, of course, there's specific rights related to the contract, whether that be land title, whatever it is. So what does an NFT, in my mind, add? So basically, I'm saying you keep the same thing conceptually. There is still a relationship of fees, rights, and a contract logically, except that now I'm adding an NFT. So why would I do that? And the concept is, and other speakers have already hit the point, that you basically can authenticate the asset using the NFT easier. You may be able to protect those rights easier. You may be able to track and trade those rights easier. So all of that can be done under contracts. And as we've already noted in many domains, including the US, the contract process, not the law, but the process that we use in the US to, in a sense, provide title insurance, to trade property, is not cheap. It's expensive. It takes time, involves a lot of parties. And the question is there a way that we could simplify that? And something like NFTs to trade ownership of property is a good example of where it could add value, where you have a market. So in a sense, if I had an NFT for my property in Florida, I could put it up on Zillow and maybe trade it even faster than it would be today. So Zillow, I can, in a sense, as a real estate platform, does automate, I'll call it trading real estate to a degree, but NFTs could even improve that. So that's my concept on why NFTs make sense. And that's really it. So Nina, do you want to go back to you, or do you want me to move on to the US law?
I would say just I would like Robert to add one thought at this point, which he raised during our preparation call, which I found very interesting. Robert, would you agree, or do you see NFTs even as more than only merely representatives of something else?
Thanks, Nina. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't kind of necessarily disagree with anything that Jim just flagged up there at all. I mean, I think this is something which has come to light in an anecdotal fashion, I suppose, and certainly in terms of the last panel and a number of the questions that were raised about how you associate the NFT, especially with physical assets off chain, where you essentially end up with a misalignment or a gap between the two. And so therefore, if you're left holding an NFT with no sort of guarantee that it links to anything in a true kind of legal, in a way that can be sort of legally enforced, then really what does the NFT end up being from a legal point of view? Is there any kind of standalone value, if you like, in the NFT itself? And I think that's a kind of a highly problematic question. I mean, interestingly, I mean, just to go back again, and in our discussions, I raised this particular example example of how this is sort of being tested in the art world. I guess many people have now heard about this because it's been in the news fairly consistently over the last few days. And that involves Damien Hirst's latest, the British artist Damien Hirst's latest project called Currency, where he has created 10,000 pieces of individual artwork, each of which is associated with an NFT. The NFTs are purchased by prospective buyers of the artwork, but the artwork themselves are going to be held in a vault for a year. And after the year is up, the purchaser has the option to either keep the NFT or the artwork. They can't have both. So at that point, Damien Hirst has raised this question as to really where the value lies. Does the value lie in the NFT itself, or does it lie in the physical piece of artwork? So one of them is going to be burned, so you will be left. And for me, I think that's, whilst I'm not necessarily a fan of Damien Hirst's work, I think he has raised a very obvious and problematic question in relation to the legal status of NFTs as certificates of authenticity, of verifiability and validity of certain assets. And for me, therefore, this raises up certainly questions, as I say, of really where not only the economic value from a market perspective would lie, whether it's in the asset itself or in the NFT, but from a legal property rights perspective, certainly where the property rights automatically lie. Do they lie in the NFT, or do they actually lie in the asset themselves? Is there a kind of a separation between the two? And that, in many respects, demands a recalibration, perhaps a reimagining of really how the property rights regime performs. I mean, just to use the from the point of view of the law of England and Wales, we know that property is really only categorized in two separate ways, whether that be things in possession or things in action. Things in possession can invariably not be intangible goods, because of this is a kind of a historic anomaly which is sort of now being challenged in many respects, precisely because of really where does possession fall when we're talking about possession of an NFT and its associated asset. And I think that is certainly a key question, and one that we need to look into in far more detail. I'm sure we'll discuss in more detail here. But just to kind of go back to this separation, this gap again, the sort of gap that Damien Hirst is highlighting, and also where something of the possession question arises as well, kind of remains in the CryptoKitties domain that has already been discussed by several participants today. CryptoKitties obviously representing one of the first mainstream interventions in NFT. And it's a question which has been raised by some scholars about where the property rights really lay, because whilst the CryptoKitty NFT existed on a blockchain that was deemed to be owned by the developer of the particular CryptoKitty, the actual substance, if you like, the object, the subject, which was the CryptoKitty, the kind of in all its design and glory, was held within the proprietary domain of Dapper Labs, who developed CryptoKitties, meaning that there was a misalignment potentially between the legal regulatory worlds of Dapper Labs terms and conditions and those of the blockchain. So you ended up with two separate forms of potential ownership: the ownership of the NFT, but perhaps no ownership of the actual CryptoKitty, because the CryptoKitty itself, at any point, Dapper Labs reserved the right to delete any content. And this is precisely the kind of thing that Damien Hirst has brought to light as well. So we definitely have a fundamental problem here about really what an NFT is from the point of view of its representation of rights. Because if it's a container of rights, perhaps in the Liechtenstein kind of model, that's all well and good. But if those rights point to nothing at all, if the asset underlying those is fundamentally destroyed, there is no subject matter for the rights to point to, then really what, as I say, what is the value of the NFT? So I will pause there and pass it back to you, Nina.
Yeah, I think you made it pretty clear that we need to distinguish between the NFT as token, as digital asset, versus what it represents, and that's, I think, to get back to to you, Jim, so that I let you continue your presentation, and maybe following you having explained the US law perspective, then finally Andres can jump in and add the Latin American view to that.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I do have slides. I'll make those available, Nina, to you so we can consolidate them as needed. But I won't read the slides total. I'll kind of skip through those. I don't want to spend too much time. But just within the US, for those of you who aren't that familiar with US law, we have lots of laws at both the federal and state level, even local level, and I'll ignore those. But between the states and the federal level, there are, in theory, laws that are designated on banking and insurance that the states control, not the federal government. And then, of course, federal government, what I call passes legislation that changes that constitutional provision to say, no, these are exceptions. So they have laws, federal laws that'll supersede the state banking and insurance laws. But in general, states have their own banking commissions, their own insurance commissions to set the state law. So that's the context. Within that, states actually in the US compete with each other, much like countries in Europe do, for business in a sense. They try to attract corporations and jobs and so on. So in our case, similar to Liechtenstein, we have Delaware, which is the corporate registration capital of the US. It has 70% of all corporations are registered there because it has favorable corporate law. In the world of digital assets, Wyoming is a state in the US that has now become what I call the digital banking capital of the US for sure. What they did is they very aggressively said, hey, we're a small state. We don't have a lot of investment here. Let's take a look at federal law and see where what I call the gray areas are that Wyoming has the opportunity to define in a digital economy, laws that make sense to benefit both and protect both investors and consumers of digital assets and products. So they have, over the last 4 or 5 years, been very aggressive about designing those laws and getting them passed. And so as a result, they're well ahead of other states. I worked with the state of Rhode Island, and over there, they've tried to pass some of these laws, but they haven't been able to get the support for them, and they haven't done, let's call it, a deep level of analysis as Wyoming. So Wyoming is a sort of a unique environment. If you operate in Wyoming or register a corporation there, you're in a sense under their jurisdiction, which is very different. So that's a little bit of background. I won't go into the federal government, but there's multiple organizations in the federal government that manage currency and banking and so on. Crypto regulation in the US is underneath either the SEC, they have a role in it, and the Commodities Future Trade Commission also has a role in it. So it's, again, overlapping jurisdictions here. We're not consistent, so that creates challenges. And you wind up with legal interpretations from different agencies and so on, which is a challenge. Probably the most famous piece of legislation in the US around related to digital assets is something called the Howie Test. It's really case law that was established in 1946. The question was fundamentally this conceptual asset, was it a security and subject to security regulations in the US, or was it not subject to security, a security? It was a different type of an asset. And so they set a set of rules. I won't go through them here, but they just define that. Anyway, the Howie Test is a big deal to determine whether an asset is a security or not. The net of it is in Wyoming, there are two main laws here. There are many, there's like 13 different laws, but around blockchain. But one of them is the SF 125 digital asset law that defines the whole digital asset environment completely. In a sense, not only what a digital asset is, what the concept of ownership is under it, that follows what they call the Uniform Commercial Code in the US that's consistent in theory across most states. But it goes through, in a sense, how you establish digital asset banks, custody relationships, transfers, all kinds of things, including fees and everything else. So it's sort of a framework for digital assets, not just NFTs. And then they have actually this other House bill that they passed called Open Blockchain Tokens Exemptions. And really what they're talking about is the fact that tokens are not securities for the most part, unless there's very strict attributes that apply. If all these cases apply, sorry, a token is not a security if any of these specific features apply to the token. So if you look at NFTs, basically, for the most part, any one of these things will say it's not security and not regulated by security law, which you would expect with NFTs in the US. So that's really where it comes down to. State of Rhode Island, as I said, they had an act on economic growth for blockchain that did include digital asset regulation and so on, but that one hasn't been passed yet. It died, so they have to come up with another bill. And then other than that, other states are drafting theirs. So if I summarize for the US, I'll say legislation is in draft process in many states. The federal level, they talk about it, but they're going to be slower to act. They killed the Digital Identity Act of 2020. There's another one for 2021. Even if it passes, all that's going to do is say, let's do a study. So from an operational perspective, in a sense, Wyoming is the only place in the US that really has support for NFTs legally today. And well-defined, and the rest of it is, I'll call it an open issue at this point. We will in the US have multi-jurisdiction issues, of course, because we do have a conflict between states and the federal government, and we also have competition between states. So if a buyer's in one state and the seller is in Wyoming, you know, which law applies, that kind of stuff. And Wyoming does define those scenarios well in their law. So the net conclusion I'll say for the US is that Wyoming and apparently Liechtenstein both have a legal framework that supports NFTs. As an example, in my case, say, let's say for carbon management on a tree farm. So we're building those solutions today. Many people are. And the nice thing is, at least there is some areas where, I'll call it the legal support for NFTs does exist for sure. And at least in my case, that's Wyoming. And that's all I have.
Many thanks, Jim. That was a very good overview. So would it be correct to summarize it in that way that a true ownership is only defined and provided for in Wyoming, but not like everywhere in the US?
I would say the legal rights for what ownership means for a digital asset like an NFT is fully defined in Wyoming. And until the federal government passes some law that says, hey, this is illegal, yes, everything is fully defined. So in fact, actually, I work with a company that legally is registered as a Wyoming corporation because of that benefit, for sure. So they're fully subject to all of those regulations, which makes sense. And you do see a lot of companies now starting to register in Wyoming for that reason.
Very interesting. So Andres, finally over to you. Compared to the US, what is the state of like ownership and how to transfer ownership in the Latin America region?
Well, thanks, Nina, for giving me the floor. I mean, I think that that Robert has, summarized pretty well the current situation of how we have to deal with this the situation of the NFTs, basically. First of all, as he was rightly pointing out, trying to identify exactly what we're dealing with in that regard. That's the sort of the kickoff to conduct any sort of legal analysis. And second, and I think that is sort of a common situation in the rest of the world, and Latin America is not an exception to that, is that when you look at property rights in general, in Spanish, derechos reales, basically you're subject to the principle of numerus clausus, and basically you're tied to the legislation, and you can only sort of apply those property rights when the law allows you to. So for example, if the concept of ownership limits you to something that is tangible, something that is physical, obviously you cannot apply that to an NFT, first and foremost. So that's sort of the current situation in general in Latin America. Sort of the question of property rights is out of the question so far, because I mean, we have to really consider that perhaps Latin America might be seen as a region that is sort of lagging behind, generally tries to copy or mimic the developments in other regions, when suddenly you see the countries such as El Salvador, considering legal tender Bitcoin. So you have those kind of situations that sort of deviate from the general trend, and it is possible to find those cases perhaps in the future. Returning to your question, I would say that in the current moment, if you take a look at any NFT, regardless of the rights or its content, if it's a whole NFT, if you want to call it, with rights and the digital asset and everything embedded into it, or just a simple representation of rights, as perhaps Jim was mentioning. In any case, you will fall outside the realm of property rights, and you will fall within the realms of a personal right, and then you will obviously be subject to the general regime, and you will have to deal with the situation on a case-by-case scenario. And even though Latin America may have a sort of a common genesis, sort of pinning in the Brazilian civil code, the Argentinian civil code, and in general, the region tends to follow the same pattern. Also, as a if you go a little bit back in time, it also mimics a bit of the influence of the civil law in Europe. I mean, sort of the path in that regard is more inclined towards the realm of personal rights in that respect, and property, is something that is right now out of the question. Obviously, as I said, we have to see how things develop, and also perhaps, sort of it's the situation, and perhaps that was something that Robert was mentioning, that perhaps we need to sort of rethink about the concept and the exact delimitations of property rights in general. I mean, in the past we have done it with certain, now we call it objects, but for example, electricity and in general energies. So for example, in Latin America are, classified under the property regime, so they can apply certain other legal regimes that depend on the definition from the civil perspective. So in that sense, maybe it's a time to sort of re-ask ourselves and rethink, from obviously looking towards in the future, exactly what do we mean by, in this case, digital ownership, digital possession. And I think that sort of the NFTs, especially the part of the non-fungible, has sort of allowed that sort of a scarcity that is characterized in property rights in general, obviously with some exceptions, but in general, sort of that limitation, we sort of have managed to copy it in the digital realm, and perhaps it's sort of a process of looking into that in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so basically what we can see, what you can tell from that comparison, is that maybe civil law jurisdictions have more problems adopting to those developments than common law jurisdictions. That's at least, what I took from our pre-discussion. And Robert, maybe you can elaborate a bit how, the common law jurisdictions seem to handle the question of, ownership rights and so forth in tokens and NFTs especially.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is complex, clearly. I mean, in terms of intangible assets of what, digital assets are certainly fall into this category as intangible personal property. Common law, and I'm talking about England and Wales, but this would obviously apply to Australia, New Zealand, as other sort of main common law jurisdictions in this regard, and ones that I speak about in our particular legal report, but obviously to aspects of the states as well. The flexibility that may be employed by judges to try and reach a conclusion for a particular problem relating to digital assets is certainly one path for reimagining and recalibrating the way that we're seeing property rights in this domain. I mean, just to not to step on Jim's toes in terms of the overview of the states here, but obviously in terms of there's the 2003 California Ninth Circuit case of Kremen and Cohen, which looked at domain names, which kind of gave a particular stance therefore on intangible personal property rights and how they could be realized. And the court's test for that, which was a three-part test, really in many respects mirrors that from a case in the English courts from 1965, which defined property more specifically for tangibles, but it was to do with about being able to find some sort of precise definition and whether exclusive possession could be determined, and whether there was a particular owner could assert a form of exclusivity over the particular property in question. So that flexibility there is sort of important in terms of the fundamental understanding of property as a right to use, abuse, and alienate something, and essentially exclude others from it. So as I've already said, that the problem that the law of England and Wales has really is that intangibles could never be seen as a thing in possession. And therefore, the discussion has been had about whether, a third category of property was actually necessary. But it doesn't necessarily seem to have actually been the case in certain judicial opinion that has come out fairly recently. And I'm referring here quite particularly to the case of AA and Persons Unknown, which was a case decided at the end of 2019. The law report is dated 2020, but where property in a crypto asset could be found for the purposes of an interim injunction. So it was looking for a definition of property in an intangible asset for the purposes of triggering an equitable remedy in that particular scenario. So we have to be quite careful here about jumping on this and thinking too universally about the definition of property in relation to crypto assets that may not warrant sort of the implementation or the order of a particular remedy. So here this is kind of an understanding of intangible assets, of crypto assets in this case, as a problem to be sorted out by the courts, really on a case-by-case basis. And as long as they're able to do that, a definition of property that sits outside of the traditional framework is deemed acceptable. But as of yet, we know that there is no sort of other formal, certainly not a formal definition of these assets which sit within property law on the statute books. So I guess the benefits, as I say, on the one hand of common law is that judicial flexibility to deal with the problems of crypto assets, and by extension, I include NFTs in this. But of course, as I've already identified, there could be different issues there. But by the same token, excuse the pun, the issue is one of actually a very narrow operative definition of these sorts of assets within existing property law and common law jurisdictions. So it's an interesting and complex arena.
I agree. And it may, just to add, the German perspective to that, which is very similar to what Andres reported. So actually, Germany does not acknowledge tokens as objects and does not acknowledge true ownership in the real sense, or title to such tokens. So it's more or less, you can compare it to know-how, right? As long as you yourself protect it, it's yours. But if somebody, looks over your shoulder and obtains that know-how, then it might be gone as well and not further protected. And that is certainly something that relates to our, civil law understanding of a numerous clauses of absolute rights. And the only exemption we currently have in Germany is, as of very recently, the enacted law on electronic securities. That's for the first time that our lawmakers actually decided to declare that a digital asset, only specific electronic securities, are deemed to be objects. And they enjoy the same protection as physical objects. So that's the first exemption that we included in the German law. And just a very, very quick round, because I know we went beyond, or we are now starting to go beyond our timing, but I thought that was just so interesting. You mentioned Wyoming as one single state in the US, Jim. And we also talked about how far that jurisdiction would reach. And I had asked you, if I, Nina, sitting in Berlin, would buy a token which had been created in Wyoming and then maybe sell it further on to a UK colleague, would Wyoming courts still claim to have jurisdiction over that token? And Jim, maybe you could elaborate on that.
They would recognize the rights for sure. Would they be able to claim? It is an open question as to whether or not they could prove that they have jurisdiction. But they would support the rights clearly. So the problem is, do they really have jurisdiction? And I said, that's absolutely it. That's a problem. Forget Germany. It's just a problem in the US. If I was in Florida and bought that NFT and tried to claim that Florida law superseded Wyoming because I live in Florida and I now hold that token, what changes that? And the only thing that really, where Wyoming wins all the time, is when you can prove that you have, in a sense, either registered your corporation there or you're a resident of Wyoming. In both cases, if you were a resident or registered within Wyoming as an LLC, for instance, you would absolutely, they would claim that Wyoming courts would have jurisdiction, and that's about it. And that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't contest that, but that Wyoming courts would make the case if it was brought in Wyoming. They would say the case should be brought in Wyoming, number one. And number two, that Wyoming law should apply.
Yeah, so that again makes it very visible, you know, this distinction between law and technology, right? Technology is working global or even beyond our Earth, but law is strictly regionally organized. And I just thought it was so fascinating, Robert, what you told us about the UK courts, how they would react in such a case.
Yeah, well, again, I mean, this was picking up from the case I mentioned a moment ago, which was AA and Persons Unknown, where the interim injunction was crucial to try and to secure some Bitcoin, which were kept in an exchange in the British Virgin Islands. So the injunction itself became important, was litigated in the courts in the UK, precisely because the injunction was good against the whole world. So, and obviously we've seen in a number of other circumstances in relation to issues of confidentiality, press intrusion, and other sort of incidences, generally involving celebrities, for example, that they will litigate in UK courts because injunctions that as an order from the High Court in England and Wales is a very powerful tool for you know, against the world as a whole. But and I know that we followed on, or I followed on from that particular point actually. And I don't know if this is something that you wanted to raise anyway, but I will jump in very quickly to say, of course, one of the key issues with this is enforcement, right? So it's all very well having an injunction on a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency exchange in the British Virgin Islands, if they ignore it, if no one can actually really do anything about this. So enforcement, of course, remains a massive issue. You know, whether you're advising clients in relation to kind of prepare them to go into certain NFT markets or whatever it might be, to try and mitigate against problems that may occur, or whether you're dealing with problems that have already occurred. One of the things that is constantly in sort of a shadow overhanging all of this is the possibility for actual enforcement. So to try and bring you know, certain actors, whether they are acting nefariously or otherwise, back into some sort of line. To find kind of justice and fairness for the actors involved.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think that all showcased already that you know, the legal issues with NFTs are far from being solved, and maybe even far from being immediately solvable. So that's maybe something to keep in mind, that yeah, that it is currently difficult to, at least on a global basis, to really establish a certain legal ground here. So to wrap it up, Andres, your final comment, your takeaway, or what would you highlight for our attendees with regard to NFTs and civil law aspects?
I would say that, trying to sum it up, for those that are developing NFTs and are out there in the industry, tread carefully in that sense of, you know, getting a proper advice and identifying clearly exactly what the NFT is and the rights that are associated to it, and exactly how to structure the situation from a legal perspective. To legal practitioners, you know, sort of a general situation that I tend to recommend people, you know, counseling companies and working with them in the tech industry in general. Not be creative, because that can sound a little bit strange, but don't be afraid of, you know, the situation and the uncertainties that are out there, and perhaps to the policymakers, sort of maybe open the discussion about, the situation of digital ownership in general, that I think it's much necessary, not only with NFTs, but in general with anything that relates to our digital life, if you want to call it in a way, and sort of see, because it's sort of the same situation that we have seen with, for example, a couple of years ago with iTunes libraries and the ownership of that intellectual property in the case of an inheritance. So it's not something new. It's actually a discussion that has been delayed for quite some time, and I think now it's a good time to open it.
Thank you. Yeah. Jim, briefly over to you. If you're still with us.
Yeah, I'm still here. I don't have anything to add, though. I mean, for me, it's a sort of black and white in a sense. And I agree with Robert, actually. If you don't have clear laws like Wyoming or whatever and jurisdiction, then you're back into the problem of case law interpretation, and all of that's literally just a bet. I will say in the US, you can identify the odds of winning a case probably by the politics of the jurisdiction you're in to a degree. There's higher probability that way, but that's about it. Yeah. So I've decided I'm going to buy a tree farm in Wyoming because it's very clear that I'll do well there.
As long as you keep your tokens then in Wyoming.
Absolutely.
Thank
Robert.
you, Nina. Yeah, I just wanted to say one last very quick thing. We've heard quite a lot today about ownership, not only on this panel, but also on the previous panel. And obviously, people are using it in different certain contexts and flavors. But what I would like kind of people to take away from this really is that you need to start taking the notion of possession seriously, because actually ownership is a principal feature of our understanding of the priority that we give to certain assets, whether they be tangible or intangible. And yet, I think not only from the use cases we've heard, but others that we can perhaps begin to imagine, leasing, rental, bailment, assignments, so many other factors that don't involve actors who are not the owners of the asset itself, will be key to the development of this in the coming years. So we need to think much more broadly than mere ownership, and we need to take possession seriously in this regard.
Yeah, I agree, and I would like to add, in the mentioned UNIDWA working group on digital assets, we actually agreed to use the term control, right? Because possession is defined in specific ways in certain jurisdictions, and control seems to be a feature which describes it without, getting into distractions from certain jurisdictions' points of use. And by having said that, I post this link here and recommend watching out what this group is proposing to these types of private law questions regarding ownership, transfer of rights, control, custody, and so forth. And I hope there will be something sensible coming out of that exercise. And by that, thank you very much for supporting this panel, and I hand over to Agata.
Thank you very much, Nina, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending where you are. Welcome to our panel. This is the last panel of today's workshop, and we will discuss financial regulatory approach to NFTs across a variety of jurisdictions. My name is Agata Ferreira. I'm a lawyer by background, scholar, and university assistant professor. I'm also UK qualified solicitor, and in the past I spent over a decade practicing law in the City of London finance sector in a leading law firm and in an investment bank. So currently I'm a professor at the Warsaw University of Technology, and I also collaborate with a number of academic institutions and companies on technology and fintech law related topics. I also have a pleasure to be an expert at the expert panel at the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum, our host today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. Unfortunately, our first panelist, Claudia, is unavailable due to vaccination-related illness. So we wish her all the best and recovery. I have a pleasure to keep on welcome again Andres, who has agreed to stay with us and share his invaluable knowledge about Latin American jurisdictions. So welcome again. You have been introduced in the previous panel. Thank you very much for joining this panel as well. Next is Joshua Elu. Welcome, Joshua. Joshua is chairperson of the Malta Digital Innovation Authority and director of the Center for DLT at the University of Malta, which runs a multidisciplinary master's in blockchain and DLT. Welcome. And last but not least, of course, welcome Alireza Siadat. He's a German qualified lawyer and partner at Atherton Law Firm, where he advises financial players and startups on the regulation of crypto assets. Alireza is an active in supporting policymakers on establishing a regulatory framework for crypto assets in his board roles of INATBA and Think Blocktank. Thank you very much for joining us. All our panelists are experts at the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum. They are also co-author of the research paper that has already been mentioned in this workshop earlier on, which we have recently drafted together with some of other experts of the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum, in Nina and Robert that has featured in the previous panel, including. The paper is dedicated to legal classification of the NFTs in a number of jurisdictions, including EU, Germany, Italy, common law jurisdictions, and Latin America. The paper is available for download at the webpage of the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum. So I encourage all of you to have a look at our paper. So a lot has been said about NFTs today, and we already know that they raise a number of legal questions and legal issues. So digital tokens in general are not necessarily well embedded in the legal systems, but non-fungible tokens in particular can be very challenging in terms of the applicability of legal and regulatory frameworks to them. So legislators, regulators, and policymakers around the world are grappling with blockchain innovation in general, and there are still many unanswered legal questions and plenty of regulatory voids. So not only NFTs can be defined differently, classified differently, depending on the sector, features, and scope, but they also represent a variety of rights and assets that themselves fall into diverse legal categories and raise legal issues on their own, as we have already heard earlier on in this workshop. So, and then we have issues relating to trading and dealing with such tokens. So my first question to the panelists is as follows. What is the current status of NFTs within the regulatory frameworks, with a particular focus on financial regulatory frameworks in jurisdictions that are familiar to you? And also to the audience, please post your questions in the Q&A section, and to the extent possible, we will try to address them either throughout this session or at the end. So Andres, let's start from you. You have this Latin American perspective on various jurisdictions in Latin America. What is the approach there of the regulator? How can we classify those NFTs under this Latin American regulatory framework, financial regulatory framework?
Well, Agatha, thanks for the question and for presenting me, and also for inviting me to the panel. I think that if you take a look at Latin America in general, obviously, as sort of we were discussing a little bit in the previous panel, NFTs are obviously in an unregulated situation in Latin America. It's not when it comes to specifically the sort of the regulation on the financial industry, if you want to call it, in particularly, it's not exception to that. Perhaps the situation in there, it's a bit more tricky when you start to look at the at NFTs, I mean, particularly sort of the background and the previous situations that crypto assets and digital assets in general have seen from, you know, the capital markets authority or central bank positions in this respect. And in general, the trend in Latin America is the lack of regulation in this respect, and the application of general frameworks, be capital markets law, sort of capital markets law, financial entities law. We generally move within these categories, and obviously trying to apply general frameworks to this particular situation. Obviously, without any success, and in most cases without any guidance from regulators in this respect. Perhaps, as I was mentioning before, sort of the situation that is being considered as a possible reference when it comes to understanding and interpreting the legal framework was the ICO situation in 2017, that most of the regulators in the region have provided or taken a stance either through binding regulation or non-binding regulation, depending on the country, obviously. In general, it's mostly on the non-binding side. So in that situation, sort of the regulators raised the issue that in that situation, the ICOs could be potentially considered as a public offering of securities, and obviously with the consequence of the application of the general framework in that respect. So in a way, if that sort of the issuance of the NFTs sort of mimic that process of conducting an initial offering of a security, and obviously under the relevant test and all of that, that usually tend to mimic the Howie Test in the US, a bit more stringent and a little bit more broad, but obviously depending on the country. In that respect, then those general regulations will be applicable. So it's again a situation where legal practitioners and legal operators in the field have to be very wary of, and be interpreting the rules in each particular country.
Thank you very much, Andres. So the conclusion here is that there is no specific, there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty and void, and not many responses from the regulators, nor even a guidance, as you mentioned. So Andres, a question to you. Maybe you can shed a light on German jurisdiction, because German regulator is quite progressive. It has responded to many of the blockchain innovation features. So how about NFTs? Where do we stand on NFTs in Germany?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Agata, for having me on this panel. So when we look at NFTs and how NFTs are regulated in Germany, I would need to repeat a little bit what we already said. First of all, NFTs is not something which is defined by law. And this is very important, because if we start to regulate something, we first need to understand what it is. We say it is a non-fungible token, but we only know the term fungible or fungibility from the MiFID definition, which says the instrument has to be standardized, maybe standardized from a technical perspective, so ERC20 versus ERC721, for instance, and it has to be freely tradable on a financial or capital market, and only then it is fungible. So taking this explanation or this definition, I can give you some insight on how Germany, or how German regulator, BaFin, and also the German Bundesbank look into the NFT. So in that respect, it is important to understand that so far we do not have any official publication by BaFin or Bundesbank on the NFTs, but there is some common practice already by the German regulator, especially BaFin, and they're the department which is in charge for the securities, or for the securities prospectus, and they look into different token instruments and qualify them according to the existing law. And the existing law, what we have in Germany, it's inside the German Banking Act, which has implemented the fifth AMLD. And we have so far already the crypto asset definition, which is a very broad definition. And we have also existing financial instruments such as securities under MiFID, but also an investment product which we call Vermögensanlage, which is different to security, but it still needs a prospectus. So this is, I think, very important, because when we look at regulation, we have on one side regulating activities, which are services, but we usually do not regulate the issuing of a financial instrument. But if you have a financial instrument such as a security or an investment asset such as Vermögensanlage, you would need to have a prospectus or a key information document at least, which is accepted and allowed by the German regulator, by BaFin. In that respect, we already have some practice on NFTs, where the German regulator says, okay, if this is an if the NFT comes, so if an NFT product is shown to the regulator, they first make the test and look, is it an existing financial instrument? Is it a crypto asset? And is it on top of that a security or a Vermögensanlage, so an investment asset? Usually you would, if you have a real NFT, you would fall out of the security definition because it is non-fungible. But if you have a fractional NFT, so if it's NFT which is fractionalized, let's say in 100 pieces or 1,000 pieces, and you can then trade this fractional NFTs, this FNFTs, then it usually fungible, and then it may be a security if it represents rights which are similar to security. So right of dividends, voting rights, etc., etc. But if it's not fungible, so for instance, if the standardization is missing or you cannot trade it freely on a financial capital market, it still could be a Vermögensanlage, so investment asset, and then it would still, under German law, need a prospectus, which would need to be accepted, approved by BaFin, and then only you're allowed to issue. This is for the issuance, yeah. And if you want to do some further services such as trading or advising on a financial instrument, then you would of course also need a banking license or financial service provider license. And this is like in a nutshell to give you some insight how the German regulator is looking into that. And I know for a fact that the German regulator has already looked very deep into the NFT details from a technological perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective, and has already some internal documentation. And once the cases become more in quantity in Germany, this internal documentation may be even published, and then you can look exactly how the German regulator would qualify a token and a crypto asset as an NFT.
Thank you very much, Alireza. Obviously, Germany, being a member state of the EU, has transposed or is subject to the EU law in general. So maybe I stay with you for one more minute and ask you, what is the EU-wide perspective on NFTs, given recent efforts of the EU regulator to introduce a regulation on crypto assets for all crypto assets across the EU? So what are we looking at here, and what is the future going to be in the EU? Does MiCA change anything?
Yeah. So given the lack of time we have, I just encourage everyone to look into our publication, because we have shown there all the current status and how the law is going to change from a EU and domestic perspective. So go on the link and look inside this document. And for those of you who are listening right now, I make it very short. Currently in the EU, we have no EU harmonized regulation of crypto assets, because first of all, we do not have any definition of crypto assets, and we have in different European Economic Area jurisdictions a different understanding of crypto asset, and we differently regulate crypto assets. This is going to change with the markets in crypto assets regulation, and the markets in crypto assets regulation is going to regulate the issuance of crypto assets with a white paper similar to a prospectus. And it's going to regulate the crypto asset service providers by asking them to receive a license from the domestic or from a national competent authority, which both the white paper notified and the license can be passported within the European Economic Area. This is very interesting for many reasons, but interesting from an NFT perspective. Right now, if you look inside in the MiCA, you cannot find the term NFT, but you can find under the prospectus or white paper requirements an exemption for tokens or crypto assets which are unique and non-fungible, which says that for those who do not really need a white paper. And from that, you can understand that right now, inside the MiCA, crypto assets covers also NFTs. But from my understanding, I believe that this is going to change, because the MiCA is not final yet. It's going to be hopefully final by Q3 next year, and then going to be effective. I believe that the MiCA is going to exclude NFTs for a simple reason, because they're non-fungible. And because they're non-fungible, they're not similar to financial instruments. The MiCA is always going to be analogous to the MiFID, and the MiFID covers fungible financial instruments, and the MiCA should normally cover fungible crypto assets. And if the NFTs are not fungible, the risk for the market and for the users is not as high as for financial instruments, and therefore there's no need for regulation. Therefore, I believe they're going to be outside of the scope of the MiCA, which then again will give to the domestic lawmakers room for regulating from a domestic perspective, which is also not good. But they're going to be outside of the MiCA, and those NFTs which are fractionalized again, which are fungible, are going to be inside the MiCA, if not already inside the MiFID. So this is my takeaway from that.
Thank you very much, Alireza. Thank you. You mentioned a few of the points as well, and the challenge of what happens if it is outside of MiCA, which is also my understanding as of this moment that it will be. So there will be a challenge there. What about the harmonization across the EU? So given that we already kind of touched upon challenges, I wanted to ask Joshua, and in the interest of time, unfortunately, our panel will be a little shorter, and this is unfortunately because there are so many issues that we could discuss here. But my next question, and starting from you, Joshua, what are the sort of main challenges, if you can continue on that theme, and also what would be your recommendations for policymakers, for regulators, for the future in terms of treatment of NFTs under regulatory approach to NFTs? And what would be your recommendation to the NFT community? What are they supposed to do right now, facing all this uncertainty and challenges?
Definitely. So first of all, I am the chairperson of a technology regulator, not a financial regulator. And we don't actually tell you what you can do and what you can't do with technology, but the MDIA is there to help out the financial regulator to make sure that the smart contracts are doing what they should be doing. And I'll probably touch on why that's important in a bit. But some challenges that we're seeing are what the previous panel discussed about when it comes to ownership, possession. So when we talk about real world objects and we have a token representing that object, do you really own the object if you just have the token? And then we also have tokens that represent virtual objects. What does that actually mean? I mean, when we think about it, a token is not even something you own. When you own a token, it's not in your wallet. What is actually happening is there is a smart contract that has your public address associated with that token. So what we're starting to realize here is there's a lot of complexities when it comes to the technology. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to the legal aspects, and regulators aren't typically versed in technology, at least financial regulators. So one of the problems that we're seeing is resourcing. Regulators and even the space itself needs to get people who are acquainted with the legal sides to NFTs, technology aspects, and the business aspects. Now, when it comes to aspects that we haven't even started to talk about, we're talking about smart contracts that can be autonomous, decentralized autonomous organizations that can not only own NFTs, but in essence, they could create their own NFTs. How do you go about regulating software running in cyberspace that is creating its own inventions? So these are interesting academic challenges. And I think our regulators now need to start seeing how do we come up with frameworks that allow for this innovation to grow and not stifle it. And this is where I have one recommendation for policymakers. Recently, we developed a technology sandbox. And the idea behind this sandbox is to create an environment where we create a regulatory space for a particular operator to work. And it's not well defined, that we define it around that particular individual. This allows for us to, over time, come up with a regulatory framework that is adequate for the type of operation. And I would highly suggest that these type of new solutions that need space to grow, need space to understand what exactly they're working with, operate within such a regulatory framework. So that would be one recommendation for the policymakers. Now, when it comes to aspects of technology, smart contracts where one single bug can result in millions of euros of losses, or if it's an NFT, if it's a priceless NFT, let's say you own the NFT that is associated with the Mona Lisa, what happens if there's a software bug in that NFT? Do you lose it forever? So we need to make sure that we have the right due diligence processes in place from the financial aspect, but also on the technology aspect. Are we making sure that the various smart contracts we're using are fit for purpose? So I would say those are my main recommendations for the policy makers. When it comes to the community, I would say keep going. So make sure, As well, make sure that your plan is legally sound as much as possible. And we've already learned this from the past from ICOs. Just because there's no regulation doesn't mean it's the Wild West. You still live in a jurisdiction, so make sure that you're as legally sound as you can be. But again, keep going. Decentralization is going to change the world. And NFTs is going to change the way that we view ownership. I believe that NFTs will empower the future sovereign individual. And we need to keep going on this mission. However, there are some challenges. This community is very still tech oriented, and we're not open to the non-tech savvy. We need to come up with tools to help onboard these individuals. So that would be it. Just keep going.
Thank you very much. I agree that these are complex matters, but whilst the technology is complex, but at least it's clear, we cannot say the same about the regulatory frameworks, unfortunately. So your main recommendations would be a sandbox that would make sense for NFTs across the EU, for example, where we start to understand there might not be harmonization there, and proper due diligence as of now. Andres, would you share those recommendations, add some more, or perhaps highlight any more challenges, given your Latin American perspective?
I mean, I probably have to agree with Joshua in that respect of using the regulatory sandbox in that respect to try to innovate in a contained manner and take advantage of them. Like, for example, Latin America has moved forward with several regulatory frameworks for allowing sandboxes in different countries. Mexico, Colombia, if I'm not mistaken, Uruguay is moving with something right now. So you can see that the regulatory sandbox has proven to be a tool. We can then sort of discuss if it's actually helpful or not. But it's a tool, it's out there, it can be used for this particular, I mean, this is the type of situation that the sandbox was, sort of conceived to tackle. So, I mean, if it's possible in a jurisdiction to use a sandbox, go for it. I mean, the people who are working in Mexico, go for it. The people who are working in Colombia, go for it, without a question. And probably I will have to agree also with Joshua on the respect for the community of keep going nevertheless of what happens. If your jurisdiction doesn't have a regulatory sandbox, navigate through it. Try to find the solutions, and also, try to navigate.
Thank you very much, Andres. And Alireza, from your perspective, given that the German regulatory framework is quite specific, quite well developed, quite detailed, and what would be your recommendation there?
So my recommendation to the policymakers, not just to the German, but to the policymakers within the European Economic Area, is not to regulate the technology, because if you regulate the technology, I'm talking to so many startups, you will just stop innovation, and this is not helpful at all. I can give you just a small example for those who are not into legal and law. If you look at some customer, some investor who's going to buy a piece of art, you would not regulate this transaction, because this customer, this investor would buy this piece of art, even though he wants to use it as an investment asset and maybe sell it later and make some return, but you would still not regulate it. Why would you regulate it if you would now put this piece of art on the DLT? This doesn't make any sense to me. The only explanation could be because now it is on the DLT, but then you would actually regulate the technology. And this is actually what I also discussed with the German regulator. And then they told me, yeah, but in your case, so I had a case, in your case, you are fractionalizing the asset and giving it to the investors. And I said in return, yes, in Germany, in the German real estate market, you fractionalize a tower and sell the apartments, but you would still not take the investors and tell them you're buying a financial instrument because they're buying a property. And they couldn't really answer to that example. And I said, okay, to me, it's obvious. We are now trying to regulate technology because we do not really understand the technology. We're afraid of the technology, and this is not the right move. And therefore, my suggestion would be looking into the details and not starting to regulate the technology. And to the community, my suggestion would be those who are now developing NFTs, similar to the ICO time in 2017 and 2018, do not make the mistake and take NFT as a marketing tool. Take NFT as an innovative product to solve some issues, and then it's really helpful also for innovation.
Thank you very much. That's a very good point. And I start to have a feeling from what you were saying, all of you, that one of the recommendations should be for the policymakers and the regulators to really educate themselves on the technology and understand better how it works and what it does, what it doesn't, before jumping into those regulations and before assuming that there are risks where there might not be that many. So just to wrap up, and we have really just a few minutes left, given that we have so many still uncertainties, but we are all in the consensus that the community should be developing, and the sandbox is something that can be helpful from the regulator point of view until other issues are resolved. Are you, looking at your perspective where you are you more hopeful or more worried about the future of NFTs from legal and regulatory point of view? Let's start from you, Joshua. Are you hopeful or are you concerned about the future of NFTs?
So I'm not too concerned. I do believe that the regulators will, the financial regulators will understand how to fit this into the environment. I completely agree with what Alireza said, that they should focus on the financial operation, not what platform is being used to support it. So as long as we take that operation first perspective of regulating, I think we'll be fine. However, I think a lot of regulation around the world is not factoring in the technology precautions that need to be there. That we need to make sure our software is working correctly. Because just imagine the first whatever license activity has a bug in its code and loses all those funds. We need to make sure our technology due diligence matches our operational due diligence. Because when you think about it, all the operational due diligence, you can undertake it all whatever you want, but as soon as you have a software bug, all that due diligence goes out the window. So we need to make sure our tech is fit for purpose.
So proactive from the point of the regulator, not waiting for the first issue to arise to step in and with some prohibitive regulation perhaps then. Andres, over to you for this last kind of sum up. Are you feeling more hopeful? Are you feeling more concerned for the future of NFTs?
I think that I will also feel hopeful for them. I think that they are indeed a tool that can be quite helpful for the upcoming years and the sort of the direction that we're heading when it comes to the digital economy in general. I would say perhaps that the only concern that I have when it comes to regulation is sort of keeping in mind that we need to have a sort of technology neutral regulation. Again, as Joshua was saying, as I said, was saying, focus on what is actually happening on the background rather than with the tools that you are doing that operation. So as long as it's technologically neutral, any regulation will be welcome in that sense. That it will bring sort of clarity in this situation that we're experiencing of uncertainty.
Thank you very much, Andres. And the last word to you, Alireza, given that you have been, as you mentioned, you have been talking to many startups, you are actually dealing with it right now, right here, and talking with regulators and trying to educate them as well. Given your experience, taking your experience into account, where are you? Are you more hopeful or are you more worried and more maybe desperate?
So since I'm doing this exercise since 2014 already, and I see a very impressive, good improvement, I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful, and I can give you one more example to that. When Germany started to introduce the license for the crypto asset custody service provider, everyone was saying this is the end for the German market, but this was not the end, this was the beginning. We've seen so many foreign players like Coinbase coming to Germany, getting this license, and now even Mika is applying the same idea of having a license for the crypto custody service provider. So I believe that a balanced and fair regulation is good for the market. And I believe that the policymakers and also those who apply it, the regulators, they're going in the right direction because they're getting more and more educated in the right way.
Thank you very much. So given that now we are seeing increased regulatory activity and scrutiny, there is also hope with that increased regulatory activity will come solutions that will help this industry develop. Thank you very much for your participation in our rather short panel, but hopefully interesting and certainly to me. And I hope to see you in some other discussions and panels throughout the rest of the year and on. and off to the organizer.
Thanks, Agatha. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. We will now be closing the session. Thank you all very much for your participation. Have a nice afternoon. Bye.